The chapter opens on a frozen battlefield buried beneath falling snow. A lone man stands tall amid a mound of corpses, their blood staining the white ground beneath them. After a moment, he turns and notices a black-haired young man behind him, clearly caught off guard. The older man calmly wonders why Ash is standing there at all, reminding him that he was meant to be away on a subjugation mission. The young man's face is wounded, yet his gaze remains steady and resolute. He answers that he has come for one purpose only, to bring the man before him down. In response to this declaration, the blond man shows no sign of alarm. He remains composed, almost indifferent, as though the threat means nothing to him. The younger man then accuses him of using people as tools, only to cast them aside once they have outlived their usefulness. Rage burns in his eyes as he addresses him as his father, revealing the bond between them. The older man responds coldly, stating that such manipulation is the natural role of someone like him and dismissing the young man as a foolish son. In that moment, the name of the protagonist is revealed: Aster A. Elmheim, a young man resolved to defy the fate imposed upon him. The scene shifts to the crest of House Elmheim, a noble family feared and revered for its overwhelming strength. Known as the most powerful martial house on the continent, they have sworn their loyalty to the royal family. At their head stands Lord Roderick, the only man in the kingdom said to possess the 7 wings. Long ago, he once saved a young boy from freezing to death in a blizzard, acting on nothing more than a passing whim. Bound by that act, the boy devoted himself entirely to Roderick, obeying every command without question. Yet his life within the house was harsh. He was constantly belittled and treated as lesser. In one memory, he recalls standing with a broken wooden sword while other boys mocked him, telling him not to grow arrogant simply because he had been allowed to stay. The wing crest engraved upon his back symbolized magical potential, but cruel irony followed him. He was the only one in the house who could not use magic at all. For this reason, even his own brothers tormented him, sneering and calling him wingless. Still, despite the endless scorn, he refused to surrender. He trained relentlessly, gripping his sword and pushing forward no matter how much it hurt. He drove his body to exhaustion, performing push-ups in pouring rain and forcing himself past his limits. He believed that unwavering devotion would eventually earn him recognition. The memory shifts again, showing him in a snow-covered forest alongside his companions. Sensing something wrong, the young man suddenly hides behind a tree, alert to an unfamiliar presence drawing closer. Shock washes over him when he realizes their group has been surrounded, and he wonders if they have fallen into an ambush. The scene snaps back to the present as he confronts his father, demanding to know whether his loyalty meant anything at all after such betrayal. Roderick responds with disdain, stating that someone like Aster should never have harbored expectations, and declaring that his role has ended. Hatred and bitterness twist across the young man's face at those words. Without hesitation, he charges forward, sword raised, determined to strike down the man who discarded him so easily. As he attacks, he admits that he was foolish to place his faith in someone like his father. He pours everything into the blow, condemning his own naivete even as the strike lands. Yet the result is pitiful. Roderick barely reacts, suffering nothing more than a shallow cut across his face. In an instant, 2 figures appear and bind Aster with chains formed of magical energy. They are his brothers. Without mercy, they assault him with glowing red swords, cutting into him as he struggles helplessly. Pain rips through his body as he cries out, trapped and unable to defend himself against their ruthless strikes. One brother sneers that someone without wings will always remain wingless. As Aster lies beaten in the snow, the 3 loom over him, one of them remarking that such a position suits him well. Weak and shaking, he asks why his father ever took him in if he planned to throw him away in the end. Roderick kneels before him and coldly tells him not to fool himself, stating that he was never useful as a person. Grabbing him by the hair, he forces Aster to look up, his gaze filled with contempt. He explains that the only thing he ever needed was the power of the 7 wings sleeping within the boy. Stunned, Aster cannot comprehend what the 7 wings truly are. Roderick then reveals that the boy's mother had been valuable to him for reasons far darker than affection. He explains that she carried what he needed, a seed meant to further his selfish ambition for greater power. Desperation overtakes the young man as he stretches his hand across the snow, trying to stop his father from walking away. His effort is meaningless. Hatred roars within his thoughts as he demands answers, but none come. All he feels is the icy snow against his stiffening fingers, his eyes empty and lost. He wonders if this moment marks the end of his path. He questions the meaning of his life and what purpose all his suffering ever served. Then, suddenly, everything fades into a warm, blinding white. Seeing snow once more, he wonders if he has crossed into the afterlife. He finds himself held in someone's arms, confused and unable to grasp what is happening. His eyes widen as he realizes this is no dream. It is real. He wonders where he is, feeling the cold air against his skin as he lies exposed in the snow. Looking down, he notices that his body is far too small. He raises a tiny hand, questioning whether it truly belongs to him. Slowly, the truth dawns on him. This is not merely a small body. It is the body of a newborn child. His gaze shifts to the woman holding him, and he realizes with horror that she is lifeless. Voices suddenly ring out nearby. and he sees a golden gleam in someone's eyes as orders are shouted. Men on horseback scour the blizzard, desperately searching for the woman. Their leader commands them to recover the baby she supposedly took for Roderick. Hearing that name sends a shock through him as understanding begins to form. He realizes that Roderick was searching for a baby and that he himself is that child. He questions whether the infant suspended in this moment is truly him. Memories surface of being found in a blizzard, and he understands the impossible truth. He has returned to the past. Golden light surrounds him as his sense of reality fractures and reshapes. Finding the situation absurd yet undeniable, he decides confirmation can wait. He knows one thing for certain: if he remains here, he will fall back into the Duke's grasp. Gathering what little strength he has, the newborn turns away from the lifeless woman and begins to crawl through the snow, driven by a determination far greater than his fragile body suggests. Golden light wraps around him, and he realizes that escape is his only option. His tiny hand begins to shine as he drags himself forward through the biting snow. Almost immediately his breath grows uneven, and he lets out a strained sound, frustrated by lungs that refuse to work as they should. Every movement sends burning pain through his small limbs, and a clear trail forms behind him in the snow. Despite a past filled with humiliation and obedience, the boy swears to himself that he will not die here. A vision of his grim future flashes through his mind, showing his hand reaching toward Roderick in anger and despair. His face tightens with pure hatred as he makes a silent vow to take revenge on Roderick. Even trapped in the fragile body of a newborn, he keeps crawling across the endless white expanse. Eventually, exhaustion overwhelms him, and he collapses unconscious just as his path is blocked by someone's feet. A small white-haired girl notices the baby lying in the snow and calls out to her father in alarm. In response, a gray-haired man steps forward. He is the Viscount of House Highfried. He lifts the child into his arms, wondering aloud what a baby could possibly be doing in such a deadly place. Held against the man's chest, the boy finally feels a sense of calm. The Viscount's eyes widen as he realizes how unbelievable the situation is, having never imagined finding an infant there. As he studies the child more closely, curiosity grows within him. He then notices the long trail carved through the snow and is stunned by how far the baby must have crawled alone. Meanwhile, the boy sleeps peacefully, his face unusually serene, in a dark, dreamlike space. The boy wonders where he is as the image of another child appears before him. A red-haired baby seems to welcome him, surrounded by drifting golden feathers. The scene shatters, and he wakes up abruptly in a crib, his thoughts lingering on something from the dream that he feels he must not use. As his vision clears, he notices children staring down at him. One of them scolds him, saying that he should not behave so wildly. Confusion overwhelms him as he realizes he is surrounded. A girl lifts him into her arms, but the black-haired boy struggles fiercely, desperate to break free. With a sudden burst of movement, he manages to leap from her grasp, shocking the other children. Without hesitation, he begins crawling away, panic etched across his face. One of the girls cries out for him to stop, startled by his behavior. He ignores her and continues his escape, unable to understand why he is being pursued. In desperation, he stretches out his hand, and golden energy surges from his body. His eyes blaze with the same radiant gold as a newly awakened magical aura surrounds him. To his shock, his body lifts off the ground. He realizes in disbelief that this is real magic. Still floating, he struggles to comprehend what is happening. Then the power suddenly fades, and he begins to fall uncontrollably from the air. Fear floods his face as he braces himself for the impact. Just before he hits the ground, the Viscount rushes in and catches him, struck once again by how strange and extraordinary the boy is. The child stares at the man in shock, recognizing him as the one who saved him before. He recalls that this man is Highfried, the Viscount ruling over Lodric's domain, land once governed by his father. As he glances at the mansion, he wonders if this is merely another branch of the Elmheim family. A portrait comes to mind, showing Highfried mu Elmheim, the head of the Viscount's house and a branch of the main family. He remembers that Highfried and his brother Lodric were known as the Two Wings, famed for protecting the royal family together. He also remembers their fate, how the Viscount and his entire family perished during a civil war. With this knowledge, the boy finally accepts the truth. He has truly returned to the past. This life is his second chance. Still, despair creeps in as he fears he may have escaped the Duke's grasp only to fall into the hands of his brother instead. A woman takes him into her arms and wonders aloud whether his magic went out of control, causing him to fly. She smiles gently, clearly pleased to finally have him there. She hugs him warmly and reassures him that he no longer needs to be afraid. The boy is left speechless by her kindness, unused to such affection. She continues to hold him with care, while the Viscount watches the scene quietly, deep in thought. After a moment, the Viscount extends his hand and states that the child possesses extraordinary power. To demonstrate, he lifts the boy's shirt, revealing a crest etched into his skin. Reflected in a nearby mirror, both the man and the woman stare in shock as they recognize the unmistakable symbol of the 7 wings. Panic surges through the boy as he sees the mark and wonders why it is there. His eyes glow intensely gold as memories flood back. He recalls Roderick's cold words about needing the power of the 7 wings that resided within him. An image flashes through his mind of his father holding him with a calculating, emotionless expression. At last, he understands the truth. He was taken in only so that his 7 wings could be claimed later. Anger burns through him as he questions how Roderick ever dared to call him wingless after stealing his own wings. The woman notices the sudden change in the child's expression and grows confused. She asks the Viscount what he plans to do with the boy she is holding. Hearing this, the child senses danger and knows he must be ready to act. He believes his power must never fall into the hands of the Elmheim family, as he needs it to carry out his revenge. To his complete surprise, the Viscount calmly states that they will adopt him. The decision is so unexpected that the boy is left utterly speechless. The Viscount gently pats the child's head and says that he is still a fledgling, unable to fly on his own. He explains that the boy needs guidance and protection, and he promises to care for him until the day he can truly fly. The child's eyes widen at the warmth and sincerity in those words. Suddenly, a small noise comes from behind the door as one of the girls collapses to the floor, having overheard everything. The Viscount realizes that all the children have been listening in secret. One of them admits that they were simply worried about the new baby. The children gather together and approach their mother, who is still holding the newest member of the family. She smiles down at the boy as another daughter steps closer, curious and gentle. With a calm, loving expression, the woman gazes at the child in her arms. She lifts him slightly and declares that his name will be Aster, like a newly born star within their family. 10 years pass. The grand mansion of the Viscount's house stands beneath a bright, cloudless sky. An older Lord Hyford is greeted by one of his subordinates at the entrance. Moments later, a confident, grown Aster steps down from a carriage, a sword resting at his waist. He offers his hand to a red-haired young woman, helping her descend as well and calling her his sister, Alphen. She thanks him warmly, reminding him of the days when she was one of the children who welcomed him into the family. The two walk side by side with serious expressions, Aster's focus fixed firmly ahead. They are heading toward the Sword Dance Assembly, a prestigious annual event hosted by a ducal family. It gathers noble martial houses from across the land, serving as both a showcase of strength and a battleground where each house tests its finest swordsmen in combat. The two siblings step into a gathering of young nobles, who are waiting for the event to begin. Almost immediately, quiet whispers ripple through the crowd. Several people cast sharp, judgmental glances toward the Viscount's family, speculating about the adopted boy whose origins are unknown. With thinly veiled malice, they wonder how far the Viscount intends to disgrace the Elmheim name by bringing such a child into public view. One noble openly points toward the young man's back, identifying him as the adopted son. His sister notices the stares and tells him not to pay attention to the poisonous remarks surrounding them. With her fist clenched, she adds that in a place like this, the weak are always crushed without mercy. The two stand shoulder to shoulder, their expressions firm and unyielding, prepared to face whatever hostility comes their way. Their father then explains that this cold reception reflects the Viscount family's standing among the nobility. He adds that he deliberately brought his adopted son here so he could witness this harsh reality for himself. With a grave expression, the Viscount asks whether the young man feels disappointed by how they are being treated. In response, the boy smiles confidently, his eyes bright, and states that he does not care about their indifference at all. Hearing this, the older man laughs in relief and pride, clearly reassured by his son's strength of character. In his previous life, Aster's first social debut ended in humiliation, marked by a crushing defeat in the arena. This place carries bitter memories for him, but now everything is different. With his 7 wings restored and golden eyes gleaming, he vows silently that no one will humiliate him again. The three of them proceed toward the grand hall where the event is being held, fully aware that trials await them inside. From a high window, 2 young nobles watch the Viscount family's arrival with open disdain. Though Aster senses the hostile gazes directed at him, he refuses to let them shake his composure. With steady steps they enter the hall, ready to announce their presence. Inside, Aster tells himself that this time his debut will be glorious. In an age ruled by knights, strength is the true measure of a noble's worth. Nearby, a light-haired young man is engaged in a fierce sword duel. Among nobles, power is judged by mastery of the blade and skill in battle. The arena represents the pinnacle of combat, where only the finest warriors prove themselves. To display majesty in battle is to demonstrate both personal renown and family honor. As the duel unfolds, the crowd watches intently, following every strike. The 2 swordsmen charge at one another in a swift clash, but above all symbols of strength stands the medal, an emblem possessed by only a rare few. With a precise strike, the light-haired swordsman disarms his opponent and claims victory. The red-haired young man stands frozen in disbelief, humiliated by his defeat before the crowd. The victor raises his sword, revealing the shining mark on his hand, the medal that signifies his authority and power. Watching from a private box, members of the Viscount's family comment that the atmosphere remains just as oppressive as ever. One of the girls remarks that she now understands why her other sisters refused to attend the festival. Aster's thoughts drift to his past life, to the bullies who once tormented him in this very place. Memories of his humiliating loss surge back, tightening his chest. His sister notices the shift in his expression and calls his name, concern evident in her voice. She asks whether he is nervous because this is his first sword dance assembly. He denies it, stating that what he feels is not nostalgia but disgust. His unexpected answer leaves her visibly confused. The Viscount then announces that he must attend a meeting and asks his son to keep an eye on his sister. She protests, insisting that she is the older one, but Aster teasingly remarks that she is clumsy. Before leaving, the Viscount advises him to use the opportunity to build connections, then quietly warns him to ensure that no one discovers the existence of the 7 wings. Once his father departs, Aster reflects that concealing such power will not be easy. All at once, he feels the collective hostility of the nobles in the hall focused on him. Letting out a quiet sigh, he thinks about how difficult it is to socialize in an environment so steeped in animosity. Even so, determination sharpens his gaze, his golden eyes shining with resolve. Seeing him walk off, his sister asks where he is going so suddenly. Calm and confident, he replies that he intends to make some friends. He approaches a group of young nobles lounging on a sofa. One red-haired boy notices him and rudely demands to know who he is. Unbothered, Aster introduces himself politely and addresses him as Brother Dallas. He calmly states his full name, Aster F. Elmheim, and explains that he is his younger brother. Dallas reacts with surprise, and Aster adds that he noticed him from afar and decided to greet him. Another noble informs Dallas that this is the boy adopted by the Viscount's family. With visible disdain, Dallas remarks that this explains why the boy dares to use the letter F in his name. Aster recalls that Dallas and Gryan were among those who betrayed him in his past life. Remembering this, he finds it laughable that he once found them intimidating. Now, they appear no more than children playing at nobility. From a brightly lit stage, his sister calls his name, trying to pull him out of his dark thoughts. She grabs his arm and urges him to leave, saying he has already exchanged greetings. Suddenly, Dallas calls her by name, causing her body to stiffen at his attention. With a mocking smile, he asks whether she is still hiding behind her father. He orders her to join them, claiming it is a command from the main house. She refuses firmly, stating that there is no master and servant relationship between their families. Aster stops her by gripping her arm and asks her to wait. Dallas, wearing a cruel grin, asks whether Aster believes he knows something they do not. He proceeds to insult her father, claiming he was a knight who failed to protect the king. He adds that the man accepted the blame and had his arm severed by his own brother. He finishes by saying that he is grateful not to carry a loser's blood. Enraged, the red-haired young woman demands that he retract his words immediately. Acting on Dallas sneers and claims that her father must be ashamed to have a daughter like her. He warns her that this is not a ballroom and that she should control herself. Mocking her further, he suggests she wear rags next time so she will not mind being soaked. At that moment, Aster steps forward and calmly says that he had been worried before coming to the event. He admits that he feared he might feel nothing upon seeing their faces again. With a cold expression, he reaches out and takes a bottle from one of the nearby nobles. He glances at his sister and says that facing them again has actually brought him relief. Then, with deliberate provocation, he tosses the bottle into the air and draws Dallas's attention. The red-haired noble reacts just in time, slicing the bottle in midair with his sword and remarking that it is good to see them again. The liquid drenches him completely, leaving him stunned by Aster's audacity. Sword still in hand, he faces his adopted brother as others shout in alarm. Aster calmly touches a drop of the liquid with his finger, tasting it, and realizes that it is nothing more than grape juice. Wearing a cruel smile, the young man remarks that the drink suits a spoiled noble like him perfectly. The scene then shifts 3 years into the past, where a tense voice urges him to hold on in the middle of a fight. One of his sisters cries out in fear, asking whether he is trying to hurt everyone around him. Golden energy surges violently, spiraling out of control and terrifying the young girls nearby. The power of the 7 wings erupts with frightening force, far beyond anything he had imagined. Watching the scene unfold, the Viscount looks deeply troubled and wonders whether such overwhelming strength can truly be restrained. He questions whether the boy will ever be capable of mastering such a dangerous power. The story then returns to the present as a guard bursts into the Viscount's meeting room with alarming news. The older man immediately asks what has happened. Interrupting an ongoing conference, the guard explains that the children of the main family and the Elmheim branch have begun a duel. Hearing this, the leaders of both families grow tense, their expressions hardening. Without hesitation, the Viscount rises and rushes out to see the situation for himself. Nearby, a noble from the main family smiles with interest, commenting that it is rare to witness brothers of the Elmheim house fighting one another. The Duke and the Viscount observe the unfolding scene, while other nobles watch with mixed concern and curiosity. The Duke smiles darkly, thinking that the festival may soon descend into chaos. Meanwhile, Dallas scoffs and angrily calls Aster a fool for daring to provoke the Duke's house. Dallas then reveals his 4-wing crest, making it clear that he believes himself to be on an entirely different level. With contempt in his eyes, he demands that Aster reveal his own crest. When Aster does not comply, Dallas mocks him, asking whether he is too ashamed to show it. With a calm but mocking smile, Aster replies that flaunting a mere pattern is embarrassing. This provocation enrages Dallas, who fumes at the audacity of being challenged so casually. Aster then declares that if he wins, Dallas will apologize to his sister. Dallas accepts the challenge immediately, stating that if he wins, Aster will belong to him like a dog for the rest of his life. Without delay, Dallas charges forward, sword raised, and the duel erupts in the middle of the hall. Steel clashes loudly as their blades collide, but Aster blocks the first attack with ease. Standing firm, the black-haired young man grips his sword steadily, his focus unwavering. Dallas then channels the power of his four-wing crest, reinforcing his weapon with magic. A red aura engulfs his blade as he unleashes a devastating strike. From a distance, Aster's sister cries out his name in fear, anxious about what might happen next. The Duke watches closely, smiling as he reflects that while his son's swordsmanship is lacking, the magical strength of his crest more than compensates. He muses that the power of one wing is like the faint flame of a candle. In contrast, the power of four wings resembles an explosive force capable of widespread destruction. Grinning cruelly, Dallas taunts Aster, asking where all his confidence has gone and whether he still intends to force an apology. Growing impatient, Dallas demands that Aster stop defending and finally reveal his power. He then raises his sword with both hands, preparing a decisive blow meant to end the fight. One of the watching nobles smiles smugly, convinced the outcome has already been decided. At that moment, a golden aura envelops Aster's sword. With perfect timing, he blocks Dallas's attack, and the opposing energies collide violently. Dallas is stunned, unable to believe that his empowered strike was stopped so effortlessly. Smiling confidently, Aster remarks that Dallas talks far too much. He follows up instantly with a precise kick that sends his opponent flying across the hall. Standing tall, Aster radiates golden light, his presence overwhelming. He reflects that he endured 10 years of restraint in the Viscount's house solely to prepare for revenge. His eyes burn with determination as he advances again, launching a relentless series of swift, powerful strikes. Dallas fails to keep up and collapses to his knees, completely overwhelmed. Another brother watches in disbelief, unable to accept that Dallas is being driven back so easily. Suddenly, green and yellow energy bursts forth, blasting Dallas backward with crushing force. In desperation, Dallas shouts that he is a four-wing and cannot be defeated by someone like Aster. Aster meets him with an icy stare, utterly indifferent to that claim, and unleashes yet another devastating attack. The surrounding nobles gasp, wondering if the boy truly intends to win so decisively. Shock spreads through the crowd as people whisper that monsters like this still exist within the Elmheim family. Focused and unrelenting, Aster continues his assault without giving his opponent a moment to recover. Standing beside his daughter, the Viscount watches anxiously and admits that the situation has become dangerous. Dallas, filled with rage, struggles desperately against the crushing power bearing down on him. At that moment, a memory flashes through Aster's mind of being gravely wounded by his own brother. He recalls the man's manic laughter as his relative lay defeated and helpless. Consumed by rage, Aster's eyes blaze as his golden aura surges to an even greater intensity. Dallas screams for him to stop, but Aster's fury no longer responds to reason. From the viewing box, his family calls out his name, begging him to calm down. A massive explosion of energy erupts, hurling Dallas across the hall. The Duke merely watches with folded arms. Aster finally halts his attack and drives his sword into the floor directly in front of his fallen opponent. Dallas lies trembling on the ground as Aster coldly remarks that he should come dressed in rags next time. With open contempt, Aster addresses him as cousin, making his disdain unmistakable. He then turns toward his family in the viewing box, who stare at him in stunned silence. Aster declares that he is no longer the wingless Ash, signaling that his former weakness is gone forever. With a calm, confident smile, he realizes that this acknowledgement has finally brought him clarity. Suddenly, his eyes glow faintly red as he senses a dark and malevolent presence. Looking toward the top of the stairs, he sees a sinister figure surrounded by a deep crimson aura. Horror grips him as he recognizes the owner of that overwhelming power. The man looks down at him with pure malice and contempt. Cold sweat forms on Aster's skin as he realizes that his former father is standing before him. The nobles are still reeling from the shock of seeing the Viscount's youngest son defeat the main family's third heir, but the arrival of this lord casts a heavy shadow over the hall. Feeling the crushing pressure of the man's presence, Aster turns fully to face him. On the ground, Dallas bursts into hysterical laughter, convinced that his father has come to save him at last. Aster now stands face to face with the leader of the Elmheim family, the feared Lord Roderick. Roderick glares at him with fury, clearly displeased by what he sees. Hatred burns within Aster as he recalls the name of the man who betrayed him in his previous life. Meanwhile, the red-haired noble crawls toward his father, clutching at his leg and begging desperately for protection. With tears streaming down his face, Dallas calls out to his father, desperately hoping he will protect him from the black-haired young man standing before him. He points accusingly at the protagonist and claims that he is nothing more than a bastard who dared to challenge the family's authority. In his panic, The noble begs his father to use his power and crush the boy who humiliated him. Without warning, the lord brings his sword down and brutally grinds his own son's hand into the floor. Dallas screams in agony, utterly stunned by his father's merciless punishment. The surrounding nobles freeze in horror, unable to comprehend such cruelty inflicted on one's own child. Even Dallas's brother is left speechless as he watches the red-haired noble's hand being crushed without restraint. The lord coldly humiliates his son, questioning why he dares to cry after disgracing the family name so publicly. Seeing this, the Viscount shouts for his brother to stop and not to harm the boy, but his plea is ignored. The lord dismisses him and declares that Dallas has no right to wield a sword. A suffocating silence spreads through the hall. At that moment, Aster steps forward and blocks his former father's sword as if challenging him. He states firmly that his cousin has yet to apologize to Sister Alphen, as promised, with defiance in his guise. He asks his uncle to postpone any punishment until that apology is fulfilled. The lord scoffs and asks whether the boy truly believes he is an Elmame simply because he was taken in as an orphan. In response, the young man declares that he is the Viscount's son, and that he learned the pride of a knight from him. The lord shows no interest in the answer, and instead turns his gaze toward the nobles seated in the viewing box. He accuses the boy of sullying the main family's reputation through his insolent behavior. He states that this situation goes far beyond a simple disagreement, and that this cannot be dismissed as a childish quarrel. He recalls aloud that the boy's father once paid for his disloyalty with the loss of an arm. The lord then questions the young man, demanding to know what he is willing to sacrifice for his audacity. Calm and unafraid, the boy prepares his answer without hesitation. He explains that this was never a squabble, but a duel, fought to answer insults with steel. The lord's anger flares at the boy's unyielding words. The protagonist then throws the lord's own philosophy back at him, stating that he has no intention of giving up anything. Watching this, Alphen grows deeply worried as her brother continues to stand his ground against their uncle. The light-haired noble remarks with amusement that the boy is only 10 years old. The lord's eye twitches, his fury barely contained as he finally sheathes his sword. In that moment, he makes his decision and orders the boy to take his stance. The protagonist is taken aback, never expecting the lord himself to challenge him. Before he can fully react, the older man charges forward with terrifying speed. His strike crashes into him, shattering stone and carving out a massive crater as he is sent flying. Alphen watches in horror, frozen and powerless to help. The Viscount desperately calls out his brother's name. He leaps forward and attacks Roderick. Their swords collide with thunderous force at the center of the hall. Sparks fly as the two brothers clash, Roderick calmly blocking his brother's attack. When the exchange ends, the Viscount rushes toward his son to check on him. Confusion spreads as no one understands how it happened. Wounded but unbroken, the young man struggles on his feet. Blood marks his face, yet his eyes burn with unwavering resolve. From a distance, the lord watches him with open contempt before turning away and walking toward the exit. The Viscount catches the boy just as he begins to collapse, holding him tightly. With exhaustion clear in his voice, he calls his son's name in worry. The injured boy weakly states that he protected his sister and upheld his promise. Moved by those words, the Viscount praises him, saying that he fought magnificently. Without another glance back, Roderick ascends the stairs, his son following closely behind him. Above, a noble comments that the Duke resorted to a childish method to resolve the situation. He reasons that allowing the boy to win outright would have shattered the family's reputation, making this outcome a compromise. Even so, the young man stood firm before the great lord and emerged as a rising star. Another noble admits he was tense throughout the confrontation, fearing that House Elmame might fracture completely, that an era of upheaval is approaching, one that may tear the world apart. Below, the Viscount supports the wounded boy while Alphen rushes to his side in distress. Sometime later, under a clear and sunny sky, several men train in the courtyard outside the mansion. Knights watch with astonishment as the protagonist spars using a wooden sword, defeating his opponent with ease. One knight expresses disbelief at the boy's skill, calling him impressive. Still focused, the black-haired youth continues training as the man addresses him respectfully as young Master Aster. Another knight remarks that his talent is frightening for someone so young. He adds that this is the same boy who crushed Lord Roderick's third son during the festival. His companion smiles and says it is refreshing to see the main family humbled after oppressing others for so long. As he trains, Aster reflects that he demonstrated his strength clearly at the sword dance assembly. He believes that this will silence those who mock the Viscount's house as a disgrace. Still, he knows his true enemy remains the family itself and his former father. That is why he pushed his limits in the duel against Dallas. As he swings his sword, memories of his clash with the Lord surface again. With focused resolve, he admits to himself that he cannot yet defeat Roderick. He understands that the wing crest only measures latent magical potential, and that he cannot fully wield all 7 wings yet. Power without control, he knows, is nothing more than wasted potential. He surges forward once more, charging his opponent with speed and precision. His eyes glow gold as he concentrates completely. With a sharp strike, he snaps the knight's wooden sword in two and shouts confidently, asking who will challenge him next. All the other knights lie defeated on the ground. From a distance, a familiar voice asks whether he is causing trouble again. Alphen steps into view, remarking that he truly has no limits, but adds that their father is calling for him. He agrees and walks toward her, stepping past the fallen knights. As he does, he notices her clothing and pauses, clearly surprised. She turns and asks what caught his attention. He comments that it is rare to see her dressed that way, and asks whether she once disliked such clothes. She replies that balance is important and that he inspired her not to remain unchanged. Confused by her words, he struggles to grasp her meaning. Smiling, she takes his training sword and says that when she returns, he will be spending plenty of time with her. He smiles back, pleased by his sister's resolve, and jokingly asks her to be gentle during their next training session. Later, the boy knocks on the door of his adoptive father's office, excusing himself as he enters. Inside, he finds the Viscount seated behind his desk, his expression grave. The young man asks what he is needed for, and the Viscount simply tells him to sit so they can talk. Taking a seat on the sofa, the protagonist waits calmly, prepared to hear whatever his father has to say. The older man begins by calmly stating that 10 years have already passed since they welcomed the boy into their family. He adds that he originally intended to wait until Aster was a little older before bringing this up. As he speaks, the Viscount places a ring on the table. The boy stares at it in shock and asks what it represents. The Viscount explains that the ring is the symbol of the next head of the Viscount's house. With a firm and serious expression, he says that he wants Aster to succeed him one day. The young man's eyes shine at the weight of those words. The Viscount continues by explaining that their house is currently in a very fragile position, something Aster already understands well. He adds that although they are only a branch of the Elmheim family, they still rule over their own territory and must protect it. Leaving the position of successor undecided for too long would invite instability. The boy then asks whether his sisters agree with such a sudden decision. The Viscount replies that he plans to announce everything at the Knight Academy, where his sisters are currently staying. Aster immediately thinks of his other sisters, Malfa and Kudo, and wonders whether they will hear the news as well. In his thoughts, he smiles faintly and admits that they likely would not be pleased, especially Kudo. His adoptive father explains that Kudo dislikes him simply because he was born a boy bearing the 7 wings. Hearing this, the protagonist suddenly stands up and refuses the offer to become the next head of the family. He explains that he still cannot properly control his magic and nearly hurt his own sister due to his immaturity. The black-haired young man insists that nothing can persuade an angry sister and declares that he is not ready for such responsibility. The Viscount watches his son quietly, his expression calm and contemplative. He then comments that Aster has always made him question whether he was ever just an ordinary child. With a gentle smile, the Viscount says that he originally planned to give the ring as a reward for the sword dance assembly. He opens a box on the table and adds that it seems the boy would prefer what lies inside instead. Aster's eyes widen as he stares at the contents, wondering what he is seeing. The Viscount reveals that the item is the magic sword Gram, a treasured heirloom of their family. He explains that it is the Devering magic blade, the only weapon capable of controlling the power of the 7 wings. He then takes Aster to a forest, saying that the location will suit what he intends to do. The boy asks why they did not use the training hall instead. The older man answers that this is merely a precaution, recalling that his adopted son has a habit of breaking things during training. He explains that Gram is a legendary sword passed down only to the eldest son of the family. As the Viscount holds the weapon, it begins to glow intensely, radiating immense power. Aster is left stunned, unable to understand what he is witnessing. He notices that the weapon has no physical blade and wonders whether it can truly be called a sword. In response, his adoptive father pours magical power into the hilt, causing a blade of red energy to form. The Viscount explains that Gram is a blade of potential, shaped and completed by the power of its wielder. With that explanation, he unleashes a single strike. A massive wave of red energy surges forward, obliterating everything in its path. The attack creates a violent vortex of air and dust, clearly displaying the terrifying might of the sword. He warns that if the wielder's power is insufficient, the blade will drain them dry, adding that the weapon's history is filled with tragedy. With a serious expression, he then offers the sword to Aster, and asks whether he wishes to try wielding it. Without hesitation, the young man grips the hilt with both hands. A golden aura surrounds him as he channels his mana into the weapon, attempting to form his own blade. The golden energy erupts violently, and he struggles to contain it. He quickly realizes that his mana is being pulled into the sword on its own, without his control. A massive beam of light suddenly shoots into the sky. In the courtyard, knights notice the flash. One of them wonders aloud whether a comet has fallen, while another argues that it looks more like something has been launched upward. His sister also notices the phenomenon, and one of the men asks what could have caused it. Looking up at the sky, she states with certainty that it must be Aster's doing. Back in the forest, the young man smiles while holding the sword and says that the weapon is extraordinary. The Viscount corrects him immediately, saying that the sword itself is not what is impressive. He points toward the sky and states that Aster's power is what truly stands out. The Viscount explains that no one in their entire lineage has ever borne the Seven Wings crest. He believes that once Aster fully masters his power, he will surpass even Lord Roderick. In his thoughts, the Viscount realizes that his adopted son may one day become stronger than both himself and his brother. However, he warns that great power always invites great conflict. He explains that if the world discovers the boy has 7 wings, it will become a serious problem. Some will envy him, others will resent him, and many will seek to exploit or eliminate him as a threat. He tells Aster that this is why he must never regret being weak now, and urges him to grow stronger while he still has the chance. Extending his hand, the Viscount asks him to train without hesitation. The protagonist takes his hand and vows that he will never return to a life of misery. With determination, he thanks his father and promises to master both the 7 wings and the sword. 3 days later, the Viscount's family warmly welcomes new arrivals home. 2 young women enter the mansion, and the red-haired one loudly announces her return with dramatic flair. She spreads her arms wide, clearly thrilled to be back, and asks for a reunion hug from her younger sisters. Instead, the girls rush past her and cling to the white-haired woman, calling her sister Malfa. Left standing alone with her arms still open, the red-haired young woman complains about being ignored. One of the younger girls remarks that she always ruins their hair by hugging too roughly. Embarrassed, the redhead denies the accusation and insists she would never do such a thing. She then notices Alphen standing near the stairs quietly watching. Without hesitation, Kudo rushes over and pulls her into a crushing hug. The pink-haired girl protests loudly as she is squeezed mercilessly. Malfa then asks their father where brother Aster is. The Viscount begins to answer with a gentle smile. Hearing Aster's name, Kudo's expression turns serious. At the same time, deep in the forest, the young man continues his training and unleashes another violent burst of red energy. He barely manages to dodge his own attack, which spirals wildly out of control. Breathing heavily and drenched in sweat, he admits to himself that he still cannot fully control the magic sword. He realizes that while he can form the blade, maintaining its stability already pushes him to his limit. Standing amid the devastation, he wonders what he must do to reach his father's level. Suddenly, a familiar voice remarks that he has outdone himself. Kudo appears, walking toward him. He asks whether she has already returned, and she complains that he did not even come to welcome her home. With a teasing smile, she calls him cold-hearted for ignoring her arrival. She then accuses him of acting special and mentions that she heard about the sword dance assembly. He responds by pointing out that the same could be said of her missions as a knight apprentice. He adds that she was the only one awarded the honorary knight medal that year. Kudo replies that if she could not achieve something like that, she would never be worthy of succeeding their father. She then asks whether he refused the role of successor because of her. The young man internally curses his father for causing confusion and explains that this was never his intention. He simply did not feel worthy of such responsibility yet. Turning away, Kudo begins to walk off, speaking bitterly about their father and brother. She accuses him of being cruel for knowing her dream and still acting the way he did. Completely baffled, Aster struggles to understand her reaction. Without warning, she suddenly attacks, releasing a powerful slash of energy toward him. The strike tears through the air and obliterates a tree behind him. Startled, he narrowly dodges as the trunk explodes. Angrily, he demands to know why she attacked him without warning. She replies casually that since it has been a while, she decided to test his skills. With a confident grin, she warns that next time she will attack with full force. Aster tries to protest, saying that his sword is still incomplete. She counters by asking whether he would give the same excuse to an enemy on the battlefield. The question leaves him stunned. She states that a knight must always be ready and that hesitation will only lead to defeat. She charges again, and he thinks she must be joking. He knows he is already at his limit just controlling his unstable magic. Still, he realizes he has no choice. If she is serious, then he must respond in kind. The siblings' swords collide, energy exploding outward as they clash. As the impact reverberates through the forest, the boy despairs, realizing that she truly intends to take him down. Their clash drove them deeper into the forest, away from prying eyes. From afar, it would have looked as if lightning had struck among the trees, bursts of light flashing between trunks. Kudo clicked her tongue in irritation mid-swing, her blade carving precise arcs through the air, her expression sharp and merciless. She remarked that he remained as skilled with a sword as ever and admitted that she had not expected him to keep pace after her years of growth at the Knight Academy. Even so, he blocked her attacks one after another. She shifted her footing with disciplined precision and unleashed a devastating blow that hurled him backward. She coldly stated that his control over mana was pitiful. Aster skidded across the forest floor, his boots gouging deep lines into the soil. Still, he forced himself upright. Looking at her, he commented that she was just as ruthless as he remembered. His thoughts drifted unwillingly into the past. Kudo had always been this way, fierce and unyielding. As the only male in the family with the formal right to inherit, and as the bearer of a seven-wing crest that surpassed anyone else in the household, he had long been a silent thorn in her life. To her, his very existence embodied unfairness. She had grown into a storm that rose against every perceived injustice. If he were honest with himself, she had always been his natural enemy. Without warning, she leapt high, her silhouette briefly framed against the canopy. He recognized the technique instantly. Her sword fell like judgment. The impact split the forest floor apart, a violent shockwave blasting outward. Standing over him, she declared that he was unworthy of becoming the next head of the family. Elsewhere, inside their father's chamber, Alphen stood near the window. Anxiety colored her voice as she asked whether it was truly wise to allow them to fight alone. She feared that recklessness between siblings might end in death. Their father responded calmly that Aster and Kudo were rivals, perhaps reckless but not foolish enough to cross the final line. Still uneasy, Alphen pressed him and asked why they had truly been summoned back from the Night Academy. She sensed the matter went beyond mere succession. He opened a drawer and withdrew a sealed envelope marked with the insignia of the Elmhine main family. The sight stole her breath. He explained that it was a summons. The elders who governed the family's core wished to see their grandchild in person. When she asked quietly whether the situation was truly that grave, he answered without hesitation that, at worst, they might lose Aster. Back in the forest, the battle raged on without pause. Their swords clashed in rapid succession, shockwaves rippling through the trees. Amid the exchange, Aster insisted that she stop speaking nonsense and reminded her that he had already refused the role of successor. She knew that better than anyone. Irritation tightened her features as she raised her blade high and declared that his refusal was exactly what she found intolerable. Her sword came down with overwhelming force. He caught it at the last second, and the sheer weight of the blow stunned him. Facing her felt less like dueling a swordsman and more like bracing against a troll wielding a warhammer. She pressed down harder, pouring even more strength into the strike. At the final instant, he twisted his wrist and flipped his blade, driving her attack into the ground. He demanded to know whether she would finally listen. She responded with a faint smile and asked if he was already trying to flee. In the next heartbeat, she unleashed her full brute strength. He was flung sideways and crashed into a tree so violently that bark exploded behind him. He coughed blood, disbelief flashing in his eyes. Kudo looked down at him and declared that if all he could do was swing a sword, he was third-rate. Those who relied only on mana were merely second-rate. Only those who mastered both sword and mana together deserved to be called first-rate. She added that she was deeply disappointed. The difference in wing crests, she explained, directly reflected mana capacity. Even a single wing meant nearly triple the power. Though she bore 5 wings and was technically inferior to his 7, he still avoided direct clashes of strength and chose instead to hide behind refined technique. With a faint smile, she asked whether he truly lacked faith in himself or whether he feared losing control again, as he had 3 years ago. Her words cut deeper than any blade. Aster froze as the memory surfaced. Had he been afraid all this time? Had he unconsciously sealed away his own power because of that incident? For the first time, he confronted that possibility. His gaze dropped to his sword as he wondered aloud whether that same suppression was the reason Sordran always felt unstable in his grip. Kudo's expression hardened further. She told him that he possessed everything she had ever desired. If he intended to let those blessings decay through ignorance and arrogance, then he should hand them over to someone who understood their value. She lunged at him, her killing intent no longer restrained. This time, he did not retreat. He met her strike head-on. Their blades collided with a thunderous roar that echoed through the forest. To her shock, she was forced backward, her footing faltering as disbelief filled her eyes. She could scarcely comprehend that he had deflected her full, powered attack. He offered a faint smile and thanked her. He told her that, because of her, he had finally awakened. Then he surged forward at full speed. She narrowed her eyes, confusion flickering across her face as she questioned why he would charge before stabilizing his blade. She wondered whether he was out of mana, though the idea seemed impossible. As he advanced, mana flooded into his sword in overwhelming torrents. The 7 wings on his back concealed a vast, nearly inexhaustible reserve. He understood that he still lacked precise control. Instead of forcing restraint, he abandoned it entirely. For a fleeting instant, he released his reliance on technique and poured every drop of mana into the raw motion of his strike. The blow descended with unstoppable force. She raised her sword and blocked it cleanly, stabilizing herself at once. Even so, she felt the difference. Something within him had changed. After steadying herself, she let out a small, amused smile and asked whether he had truly thought this through, or if this was simply another half-formed impulse. He met her gaze without hesitation. There was no uncertainty left in him. He told her plainly that he had no intention of wasting this second life. This time, he would seize everything that had once slipped from his grasp: the power of the 7 wings, the sword Graham, and his rightful place within the family. These were the things he had struggled desperately for before and failed to claim. At the mention of a second life, she stiffened almost imperceptibly. Shock flickered across her face. In that brief opening he moved. Mana surged violently into his blade as he closed the distance in an instant. He leaped high into the air, gathering every ounce of strength he possessed. His sword was poised to fall with absolute finality. Then he vanished. Kudo's eyes flew open in shock when Aster vanished from her sight midair. For a split second, she thought he had disappeared entirely, but he had not. Instead of rising higher, he had dropped low, compressing his mana inward and forcing it into a tighter, denser flow. The pressure around him thickened as he funneled everything he had into his blade. He announced without hesitation that he would no longer hold back. Kudo felt the change instantly. The atmosphere itself seemed to grow heavier. She understood at once that the duel was reaching its conclusion. Aster brought his sword down with devastating force. The air shrieked as it split beneath the descending arc of condensed mana. Sometime later, Kudo slowly opened her eyes. Instead of shattered trees and scorched earth, she saw the familiar ceiling of her own bedroom. For a few seconds, she could not understand how she had ended up there. Sunlight streamed through half-drawn curtains. By the window stood her older sister, Malfa, quiet and composed. Malfa turned slightly and remarked that Kudo had taken quite a while to wake. Kudo pushed herself upright immediately, her voice sharp as she demanded to know what had happened to the duel and what the result had been. Malfa's smile was gentle. She explained that Aster had carried Kudo back himself. He had told the household that Kudo had fallen asleep in the middle of the fight. According to him, the exhaustion from her journey back from the Night Academy had finally caught up with her, and she had simply lost consciousness. Kudo lowered her gaze to the sword resting nearby. That was not what had happened. She remembered the final moment with perfect clarity. Aster's blade had stopped just inches from her body. She had felt the crushing density of his mana, enough to cleave her in two. Yet at the last instant, he had dispersed the mana coating the blade. Only the residual shockwave had struck her. It had been strong enough to knock her unconscious, but it had not been meant to kill. In that moment, she had understood something simple and undeniable. No matter what he claimed, Aster would never kill his own sister, and yet, for the briefest heartbeat, she had believed he might. A faint smile touched her lips. He was younger than her, and yet he had grown into something infuriatingly formidable. What an unbearable little brother he had become. She rose abruptly and seized her sword, asking Malfa where Aster was. Her eyes sharpened as she declared that she would not accept a duel that ended like that. The next time, they would start from the beginning, both at full strength. Malfa's expression shifted. She informed Kudo that Aster had already left the castle. Kudo froze. Malfa explained that the main house had summoned him, and that earlier that day he had departed alongside their father. Seeing Kudo's confusion, she asked whether she truly had not been told about the summons. Anger flared in Kudo's voice as she demanded to know why no one had informed her. Far beyond the castle grounds, a horse-drawn carriage rolled steadily along a forest road. Inside, Aster sat across from his father in heavy silence. His father explained that the person Aster was about to meet was one of the old lords who quietly supported the Elmine family. Though retired from public leadership, the former heads of the main and branch families, along with the powerful elders beneath them, still wielded immense authority. They no longer stood in the spotlight, but they governed from the shadows. He added that those elders had never once shown the slightest interest in Aster. For them to summon him now, after his adoption, was far from trivial. Aster listened calmly and replied that it was most likely related to the sword dance assembly. He mentioned that he had heard the elders of Elmine valued the family's honor above all else, above wealth and even above life. He stated that anyone who stained that honor would be cast aside without mercy, as though thrown into a beast's cage as feed. His father stared at him in disbelief, and demanded to know where he had heard such an absurd tale. Slightly flustered, Aster answered that he had heard it somewhere long ago. Then, more steadily, he said he was prepared for whatever awaited him, whether punishment or exile. After a short silence, his father asked whether it truly did not bother him to leave without saying farewell to Kudo. Aster smiled faintly and replied that it was fine. Their departures had been scheduled close together anyway. He added that it was probably better if he was not around. Since Kudo disliked him, she would likely feel more at ease in his absence. He continued by saying that, thanks to her, he had finally begun to understand how to wield the sword Graham properly. He could now draw upon the power of the seven wings more freely than before. With steady eyes, he told his father that no matter what happened next, he should not come to rescue him. He declared that he was ready to survive on his own. His father opened his mouth, clearly intending to scold him for speaking so recklessly. Before he could, a voice rang out from outside the carriage, asking why Aster was acting so dramatic when he was the youngest among them. Aster's eyes widened in shock. Clinging to the side of the moving carriage was Kudo herself, her expression sharp and stubborn, alive with challenge. Without hesitation, she hauled herself inside as though the journey ahead had always included her. Once fully inside, she immediately turned on Aster, her eyes blazing. She demanded to know why he had slipped away without saying a single word to his older sister. Her tone carried anger and disbelief in equal measure. She added that she had heard about the summons from the elders of the main house. She pointed out that such a summons had never once been extended to her or to Malfa, which made it sound less like an honor and more like a threat. Their father's voice cut in firmly, reminding her that she could not accompany them to the main house. He explained that the matter was too sensitive and too dangerous to involve her. Kudo calmly took a seat beside Aster anyway. She replied that she already understood the situation. She knew that their father had called her and Malfa back from the Night Academy to guard the estate during his absence. She stated that she was not foolish enough to miss that implication. Still, her expression hardened as she added that a summons from the main house meant the matter was serious enough to require extreme caution. She revealed that Malfa herself had warned there was a real possibility Aster might not return. Aster brushed it aside with a calm smile and told her she was overthinking it. He claimed he was simply going to talk and would return soon enough. Deep down, however, he understood the truth. There was no guarantee he would come back safely. Kudo suddenly raised a finger and pointed it directly at him. She told him to listen carefully. Blunt and unfiltered, she admitted that she hated him. Aster blinked in surprise, but she did not waver. She said she hated that he was a man in a family where that fact alone granted him advantages. She hated that he bore 7 wings. She hated that he was always treated as special. She hated that he was stronger than his older sisters. She hated that he carried himself with maturity despite being the youngest. She hated all of it. Then her voice softened. No matter how much she despised those unfair advantages, he was still family. No matter how strong he pretended to be, no matter how composed he acted, he was still her little brother. She rose to her feet, proud and unshaken, and ordered him to return properly so they could settle their duel again. This time, she declared, they would begin at full power from the start. A faint smile curved her lips as she added that she would not allow him to escape with such a cheap victory. With that, she leapt from the moving carriage as effortlessly as she had climbed aboard. Startled, Aster leaned out and asked his father why she had gone through the trouble of coming all that way just to say those things. His father watched her shrinking figure on the road with a proud expression and replied that, to him, it had sounded like a proper farewell. Aster's lips curved into a quiet smile. Looking back, he saw Kudo standing in the road behind them, waving boldly at the departing carriage. In his heart, he thanked her, and silently, with unwavering resolve, he made himself a promise. No matter what awaited him at the main house, he would return. Viscount Highfried and Aster arrived at the Elmheim main residence, where a guide squad was already waiting the moment they stepped onto the estate. Their captain formally informed them that the Grand Elder was expecting them inside. Highfried calmly replied that no escort was needed because he already knew the way, but the captain firmly stated that he could not allow that, explaining that they had been ordered to bring both of them in together. From that alone, Aster understood they had not been called here out of family affection. The welcome was too rigid, too deliberate. Even so, as he looked over the familiar grounds, a faint nostalgia rose inside him. He quietly thought that it had been a long time since he had returned home. Though memories stirred, he said nothing and walked on with the guides. As they made their way inside, Highfried spoke in a low, serious voice and said that Aster surely understood what this meant. He warned him not to act rashly, at least not today, no matter what was said. Aster answered without hesitation that it would depend on how the other side behaved. His father let out a small breath and said that the problem was precisely the other side, then tried to explain that the person they were about to meet was someone dangerous. Before he could finish, Aster cut in casually while looking elsewhere, and remarked that Darius was nowhere to be seen. He added in an indifferent tone that, with his dominant hand crushed, returning anytime soon would probably be difficult. Highfried shot him a sharp look and asked whether he was listening at all. Aster answered simply that he was. Then he added that for today he would stay as silent as a clam because his sister had told him to return safely. By then, they had reached a massive door. It slowly opened with a heavy groan that echoed through the corridor. Once they entered, the guard captain loudly announced that Lord Highfried and his son had arrived. At the far end of the grand hall, an elderly man greeted them in a measured tone and remarked that they had finally come, asking whether it had already been more than 10 years. Father and son stepped forward together. Another elder, sounding faintly amused, greeted Highfried as his grandson. At once, Viscount Highfried dropped to his knees, bowed deeply, and respectfully said that it had indeed been a long time, first calling him the sixth head, then correcting himself to Great Grand Elder. Aster, however, remained calm. As he felt the old man's gaze press down on him, he realized that this was the monster hidden in Elmheim's shadows, Zenith A. Elmheim, the sixth head of the main house. Around him sat the true power holders beneath the Elmheim name, figures of immense influence. Aster recognized several of them from the Sword Dance Festival. His eyes moved across the hall before he casually asked whether Roderick was absent. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, but before anyone else could answer, the sixth head sharply stated that Roderick was not here, explaining that he commanded the knights who directly served the royal family and had no time to involve himself in vulgar matters. As he spoke, a terrifying aura poured from his body. The pressure was thick and suffocating, weighing down the entire hall like an invisible force. He coldly added that, since Roderick was occupied, The old men had kindly taken it upon themselves to handle the administrative side of this matter. Aster stayed outwardly calm, but his thoughts moved quietly. In his previous life, he had never even gotten the chance to stand before these people. Now he saw clearly that gathering so many executives without the current head present proved just how much influence the retired sixth head still held. Even in retirement, Zenith's authority remained overwhelming. Hyfried finally spoke in a controlled voice and asked what exactly these vulgar matters were. Zenith let out a low laugh and said that Hyfried had likely already guessed. His sharp eyes shifted toward Aster, as he remarked that Aster's pet dog had caused quite a disturbance at the sword dance festival. The insult lingered in the air, deliberate and sharp. Aster lowered his gaze for a brief moment, then looked forward again with his golden eye steady and unshaken. Inside, he calmly concluded that this was exactly what he had expected. Hyfried responded that, if this was about that incident, the current head, Roderick, had already settled it and closed the case. Zenith immediately dismissed that, coldly saying that Roderick's actions had merely been a performance for the public, and did nothing to erase the stain on Ilmam's name. He said that adopting a child of unknown origin had been a mistake from the beginning, though they would have overlooked it if the boy had remained harmless. But his voice hardened as he said that things changed the moment that child bared his fangs at the main house. For that, he declared, banishment was unavoidable. At once, killing intent flooded the hall, far more intense than before. The pressure became almost unbearable. Zenith continued that the boy would of course not escape proper punishment either, and he addressed Hyfried directly. The threat was unmistakable, and the room fell silent. After hearing enough, Aster spoke up firmly and said that he alone had done everything, and that his father had nothing to do with it. Hyfried neither stopped him nor openly supported him. Seeing his father remain silent, Aster slowly steadied himself and quieted down again. Zenith watched the exchange with unreadable eyes and said that, as expected, the boy had no discipline. He criticized him for daring to interrupt while adults were speaking. Then the sixth head slowly rose from his seat, and the atmosphere in the hall grew even heavier. In a deep, commanding voice, he declared that Elmheim led 12,000 knights and carried a great name, but the knights were far from united. He explained that countless people constantly aimed for the highest seat, and his sweeping gaze across the gathered elders and executives made the meaning obvious. Power within Elmheim was unstable, always contested, and even the slightest crack in reputation could become a weapon in such a place. Zenith stepped forward once more and said that all they wanted was peace of mind, proof that Aster was not someone who would bring ruin to Elmheim. With a gesture, he had a sword brought before Hyfried. The blade radiated a violent and overwhelming aura, spilling power into the hall like a storm on the verge of breaking. Zenith asked whether Hyfried remembered what had happened before, reminding him that when he failed to protect his liege and disgraced Elmheim's name, they had Roderick cut off his arm in that very hall. Then, releasing an even heavier wave of killing intent, he gave his merciless order. He told Hyfried to cut off the brat's head, and said that, if he did, the matter would be considered settled. Hyfried refused without the slightest hesitation. He firmly declared that if he were ever forced to kill his own child, he would rather take his own life. There was no fear in his voice, only absolute resolve. Aster could only murmur the word father, but nothing else came. He found himself unable to continue. Zenith remained standing, his crushing pressure still filling the hall. His expression did not change. Calmly yet with terrifying certainty, he said that in that case Hyfried should die. Then he added that his wife should die, his daughters should die, that brat should die, and everyone connected to them should die. The hall sank into deathly silence. Then Zenith delivered his final sentence. From that day on, the Viscount house was dissolved. The moment the declaration fell, numerous knights surged forward. The knights moved at once. Steel flashed through the hall as drawn swords closed in around Viscount Hyfried, their killing intent fully bared. Seeing his father surrounded, Aster stepped forward and raised his voice, asking why the Grand Elder was so afraid. Zenith narrowed his eyes and demanded to know what he meant. Aster met him without flinching. With a sharp, fearless tone, he said that if they were truly frightened of being bitten by a pet dog, then it was a pitiful sight to watch so many grown men huddled together in fear. The entire hall fell still at his audacity. Banishment, execution, punishment, none of it seemed to matter to him. He continued that they could do as they pleased to him, but if they intended to touch his family, then things would be different. As he spoke, he pulled off his shirt without hesitation. Hyfried watched silently, already understanding what his son was about to reveal. Before turning back to the elders, Aster softly apologized to his father and admitted that, in the end, he was not very good at staying quiet after all. A nearby knight stared in disbelief and blurted out in shock at the mark on Aster's back. Aster stood tall and clearly revealed the winged emblem. Then he declared that, from that moment on, those 7 wings would become Elmheim's enemy, and he told them to think carefully about what that meant. The threat was no longer concealed. It was absolute and impossible to ignore. At once, disbelief spread through the chamber. One person muttered that it was impossible. Another wondered whether it could really be the 7 wings emblem. A different elder insisted it had to be fake, saying that in all the centuries of their history, Such a thing had never appeared on a human body. Even the fat elder, though unsettled, admitted that the crest itself was unmistakable. Zenith stepped forward and sharply demanded whether Aster truly understood the meaning of what he was showing them. His words were heavy, tense, and pressing. Aster responded almost casually, though strange confidence lay beneath his tone. He remarked that the answer should be obvious, since the more wings there were, the more shocked people always became. At that moment, attention shifted to a blue-haired man who had been watching the scene closely. Instead of panicking, he let out a quiet laugh and politely urged them to continue, clearly amused by the turn of events. His reaction clashed sharply with the suffocating mood in the room, while another nearby figure looked deeply disturbed. Zenith spoke again, this time explaining with grave seriousness that the wing emblem was originally an organ used to generate magical power. Long ago, spirits had shared that power with humans, and by passing it from parent to child, humans deepened and strengthened it over generations. Yet, he declared, there had never once been anyone who reached 7 wings. That statement sent a ripple through the room. Aster's expression tightened slightly as he asked whether that meant he belonged to the spirit clan. Zenith met his gaze and answered that, if the 7 wings were real, then perhaps he did. The tension deepened. Highfried could only watch his son in stunned silence, the weight of the revelation visible on his face. But Aster stepped forward without wavering, and firmly declared that he was a child of the Viscount house. He said that, at this point, his birth no longer mattered. What mattered was whether everyone in that room truly had the resolve to make an enemy of him. His words froze the air. The 7 wings were no longer just a shocking revelation. They had become a direct challenge. Calm and calculating, Aster continued. He said that if Elmheim cast him out, then many among the martial nobility would surely welcome someone bearing the 7 wings. If that happened, then for those already living in fear of rebellion, he would become a much greater threat on the outside than under their control. He concluded that, rather than discarding him, they should want to keep him close. As a symbol surpassing even Duke Roderick himself, the so-called 7 wings, there was not a trace of fear in his eyes. No hesitation, no doubt, only cold clarity. Everyone seated in the chamber grew uneasy. The force of his logic spread over them like a storm cloud. What he offered was not merely a plea for survival, but a political weapon, a dangerous shift in balance that none of them could dismiss lightly. Inside, Aster thought back to Zenith's earlier words. Elmheim was not a single united force. Cracks already ran beneath its surface. In truth, a rebellion would one day erupt, a massive civil war that would swallow the entire nation. Having seen that future once before, he knew he could not remain passive if he wanted both himself and the Viscount house to survive. At the very least, he had to determine here and now who among them would stand as an enemy and who might become an ally no matter the risk. His resolve hardened. This was no longer merely about noble pride or the 7 wings. It was about preparing for the storm that only he knew was coming. Zenith responded with open anger, his authority pressing down on the hall like crushing weight. He sharply demanded whether Aster truly believed he possessed that much value, then said there was still no proof the 7 wings were genuine. His words were meant to smother Aster's momentum with doubt, intimidation, and authority, but Aster only smiled. Calmly, almost provocatively, he said that if they believed the wings were fake, then they should kill him quickly. He added that if they did, it would become a war between him and all of them. Outwardly fearless, inwardly he thought carefully. Killing him now would be simple. But if Elmheim truly understood what was at stake, then what would they choose? That was the gamble. He knew they could not act carelessly while uncertainty still surrounded the 7 wings. As the tension tightened like a drawn bowstring, the blue-haired man suddenly rose to his feet and lightly clapped, as if entertained by the entire exchange. He remarked that the conversation was going in circles, then smoothly suggested that they impose a trial on Aster instead. The heavyset elder stiffened at once and protested, calling out to Count Maze. But Count Maze interrupted in the same relaxed tone and said that they all wanted to see it anyway, the power of the 7 wings. With a faint smile, he added that it would not be too late to decide Aster's fate after witnessing that. The mood shifted again. What had begun as an argument had now turned into something more dangerous, a test that could either prove Aster's worth or condemn him completely. Count Maze pressed further, saying that this was the residence of the world, renowned martial clan, so surely they could prepare 1 or 2 suitable trials. The moment Aster heard the name Count Maze, his thoughts sharpened. There was no mistake. This man was an ally. The timing of the suggestion and the direction of the conversation made it clear. It was a lifeline hidden beneath casual curiosity. After a long pause, Zenith finally agreed, in a cold, controlled tone. He ordered them to follow him. He remarked that teaching manners to a grandson who did not know how to speak properly was also the duty of an old man. He led them away until they reached a heavy structure. Zenith stated that this was the trial ground. It was dark inside, and beyond the darkness lay an underground bunker connected to the waterways. He explained that it had originally been built as an emergency evacuation shelter, but they were currently keeping a single magic beast there. Then he announced the trial. It was simple. Aster only needed to defeat that beast. The simplicity of the words made the challenge feel even heavier. Highfried let out a deep sigh, unable to hide his frustration. He muttered that Aster had always been a troublesome child, always crying and screaming when young, and reminded him that he had warned him many times to keep the existence of the 7 wings hidden. There was disappointment in his voice, but worry as well. Aster listened in silence. Then he stepped forward, placed his hand on the door, and calmly said that something so conspicuous could not be hidden forever, and that this had been the perfect chance. The heavy door creaked open, and cold darkness spilled outward. Whatever waited beyond was not merely a beast, it was proof. Without hesitation, Aster walked toward it. Hearing his son's determination, Viscount Hyfried called out one last warning, telling him not to lower his guard. Aster answered at once that he was going, then briefly glanced toward Count Maze. The blue-haired noble wore a quiet smile, as though observing everything with calm interest. That faint smile remained in Aster's mind as he descended into the underground bunker. Damp air pressed in around him, heavy and still. The darkness was thick, yet not so complete that he could not see. Then he noticed it. A severed head lay on the ground. Even in the dim light, the sight was unmistakable. At that moment, a cold voice echoed down from above. It casually remarked that the dead man had been given a chance to clear his name as well, but had only cried and screamed until the end, making him unbearable to watch. They were speaking of Duke Roderick's son. The head at Aster's feet belonged to Darius. The same voice continued with faint warning and told Aster not to disappoint them now. The meaning was obvious. This was not merely a trial, it was judgment. Suddenly the ground trembled. From the darkness a gigantic and terrifying beast emerged. It stood before Aster with overwhelming power, and its roar shook the entire underground chamber so violently that the walls themselves seemed ready to crack. Aster tightened his grip on his sword, the blade giving off a faint gleam in the dark. Above him, the declaration came once more, firm and merciless. The trial had begun. As he faced the monster, Aster thought to himself that the rumor had been true after all. Elmheim really did keep a magic beast inside its own mansion, and just this once he found himself feeling sorry for Darius, for being born into a house filled with monsters. Keeping his hand low, Aster faced the beast just as it unleashed a thunderous roar that shook the entire chamber. He calmly prepared himself and began to speak, but before the thought could fully settle, he exploded forward. In a single flash, he shot past the magic beast so fast that the eye could barely follow him. The instant he crossed its body, the monster was cleanly severed into multiple pieces. From above, everyone watching was left speechless. After landing, Aster casually hid his true reaction and lightly remarked that, to him, Sister Kudo was far more frightening than this creature. But the moment he said that, something impossible happened behind him. The beast's mangled body began to move. Piece by piece, the severed flesh pulled itself back together until the monster stood whole again, as if it had never been cut down at all. The instant Aster saw it, disbelief filled his face. He muttered in shock that it made no sense, then realized the truth. This thing was undead. As if to confirm it, the restored monster let out another savage roar. Above, Viscount Hyfried cried out in horror and demanded to know why an undead was being kept beneath the mansion. In response, Zenith A. Elmheim watched with a dark, sinister smile and calmly explained that such creatures were drawn to the smell of death. He said it had wandered down there on its own, expecting fresh corpses to feed on. No matter how many times they cut or burned it, it refused to die, so in the end they captured it, and kept it as the ideal opponent for measuring someone's strength. In the same cold tone, he added that it had also made disposing of bodies much easier. The fat elder nearby was visibly shaken. He protested that even skilled knights struggled to capture an undead, then questioned whether Zenith truly intended to have the 7 Wings boy die for nothing. Zenith's smile only turned colder as he answered without hesitation that, if the boy died, it would simply prove he was nothing but an empty braggart. He added that a winged crest without power was not even worthy of being called decoration. As everyone above continued to watch in silence, Zenith went on with chilling indifference. He said there was no reason to worry, because even if Aster died, they would still find ways to make use of him, and that in truth, such an outcome might be even more convenient. Those words crushed the air. No one replied. Only the blue-haired boy kept watching in silence, thinking to himself that after all that bold talk, Aster had better not die so easily. The focus returned to the battle below. Aster and the beast clashed fiercely, releasing waves of violent energy that spread through the underground chamber. While continuing to strike the monster again and again, Aster analyzed the fight in his head. No matter how many times he cut it, there was no real effect, and its regeneration was far beyond that of an ordinary undead. He reminded himself that undead were already dead to begin with. To kill one completely, it had to be burned in sunlight or purified by a holy weapon. If neither option was possible, then the basic rule was simple: do not fight it. But he immediately discarded that thought. Retreat was impossible here. His eyes hardened. He thought that, if he relied only on ordinary textbook tactics, then there would be no point in calling himself 7 Wings. Even before a nearly immortal enemy, he refused to yield. He had to prove his worth. With that resolve burning inside him, Aster swung his weapon and unleashed a crushing strike straight ahead. He declared to himself that he would overpower the undead with sheer force. In the next instant, an enormous explosion erupted from the clash. A massive blast rocked the entire bunker, hurling dust and shockwaves in every direction. The elders above were stunned by the sheer amount of power released. One stammered in disbelief at the monstrous magic power. Others stared down in astonishment and said that this must be the power of the 7 wings. Another quickly demanded to know what had happened below and whether the beast had finally been defeated. Through all of it, Zenith remained almost entirely unmoved. As the dust slowly cleared, the figure still standing at the center of the battlefield was revealed. It was Aster, completely unharmed and still on his feet. Zenith quietly muttered in disappointment that it was a waste, but before anyone could fully process the result, the magic beast lunged again without warning. Its attack came so suddenly that even Aster failed to notice the moment it moved. In the blink of an eye, he found himself directly beneath the towering monster as it roared down at him, its horrifying face hanging right above him. From above, Hyfried shouted Aster's name in panic. At that moment, the blue-haired boy suddenly spoke and told Lord Hyfried not to ruin everything by jumping in to save him. Furious, Hyfried turned and demanded whether he expected them to simply stand there and watch the boy die. The blue-haired boy calmly told him to settle down, then kept his eyes fixed on the battlefield and said that he should look more closely because Aster still seemed to have one final card left. Everyone's attention immediately turned back below. There stood Aster in terrible condition after the blow. Yet despite his injuries he remained upright. More than that, he was smiling. Looking at the outcome so far, Aster quietly said that it was good and that it seemed to be working properly. He noted that it was slimmer than before. Then he slowly raised his sword and leveled it at the monster. From that stance alone, it became obvious that something decisive was coming. In the very next moment, an overwhelming surge of power burst from his blade and shot upward like a blazing pillar. The force was so intense that it instantly swallowed the monster before him. With a single strike, the terrifying undead was utterly obliterated. As the destructive power roared forward, Aster shouted with fierce resolve that it would continue until the creature finally died. Watching that attack, Viscount Hyfried was left stunned. As he stared at the technique unfolding below, he began to think that it was the move he had once shown Aster. Memories surfaced in his mind, but the longer he watched, the more he realized it was not the same. In disbelief, he corrected himself and thought that it was something else entirely. The energy from Aster's strike continued to rage violently across the battlefield. Its pressure was so overwhelming that even the elders above felt it clearly. The entire underground chamber began to tremble under the strain. One elder shouted that the place was about to collapse. Another urgently called for the elder lords to move, and panic quickly spread as the destruction threatened to bring the whole structure down. Yet in the middle of that chaos, Zenith A. Elmam remained perfectly calm, quietly observing everything. He finally spoke in a cold, composed voice and said that this, then, was the power of the 7 wings. The yellow-haired man nearby looked completely shaken. His eyes widened as he tried to understand what he had just seen. In a trembling voice, he demanded to know what in the world had happened, then immediately asked what had become of the magic beast. Zenith, who had watched the entire exchange without missing a single detail, calmly gave his analysis. He said that Aster had dragged the undead into a whirlpool of magical power and torn it to pieces. Even his measured words carried a trace of astonishment. After saying that, Zenith fell briefly into thought as he evaluated what he had just witnessed. In his mind, he concluded that it had not even been a refined technique, only raw force driven by the overwhelming quality and volume of magical power one would expect from someone with 7 wings. He then turned to Viscount Hyfried and calmly asked whether that outcome had been part of his plan. Hyfried shook his head slightly and answered honestly that it had not. He admitted that even he was surprised by how much his son had grown, and both pride and genuine astonishment could be heard in his voice. At that moment, the blue-haired man stepped forward and respectfully asked Zenith whether the test had now been accepted. Zenith looked around at the others present, found no sign of opposition, and calmly declared that no one seemed to have any objections. Hearing that decision, the blue-haired man immediately called upward and loudly told Aster that he had passed, adding that it would be best for him to come up soon. Aster's voice soon answered from below, though with slight awkwardness. He explained that the chain he had used to descend had been destroyed during the battle and asked whether they could lower a rope instead. The scene then shifted to a quiet room. Zenith sat there calmly, wearing the composed expression of someone who had already reached a decision. Looking toward Aster, he said in a steady voice that the opportunity before him would not come twice, and if he let it pass now, there would be no second chance. Aster answered at once, calm but firm. He said that he had no interest in disputing the succession of the main family. He added that if someone like him lingered around the mansion, his cousins would never rest easy, and that his place was with the Hyfrieds. His answer sounded simple and humble, as though he had already accepted where he belonged. But the moment Zenith heard him, the old man began to laugh softly. It was not mockery, but amusement, as though he could see through the calm surface of Aster's words. With a slight smile, he remarked that Aster was pretending to sound humble, then asked whether he truly thought he could hide the ambition burning in his eyes. Zenith's gaze sharpened as he pressed further. He asked whether Aster intended to point his sword at Elmheim one day, and whether his true goal was Roderick's head. The question came so directly that Aster looked momentarily caught off guard. Seeing that reaction, Zenith laughed again and waved away the tension. He lightly told him not to be so guarded, then said that there was no need to peer too deeply into his thoughts for now. At last Aster voiced the question he had been holding back. Looking straight at Zenith, he asked why, if rebels were truly the enemy, the old man would even tolerate him. Zenith's expression turned serious. The faint amusement disappeared, replaced by a calm, heavy tone. He reminded Aster that Elmheim was not a unified bloc either. He explained that Roderick's character was too strong, and that if Aster's existence could serve as a restraint on him, then that was acceptable as well. Then his eyes sharpened again and the room grew tense. He quietly warned that if Aster ever bared his fangs at him, then Aster already knew what would happen. The warning was soft, but its meaning was unmistakable. Aster stayed silent for a moment. Outwardly he remained calm. Inside, however, he cursed Zenith as an old monster of Elmheim. Just then, the door opened and Viscount Hyfried stepped inside. Looking toward Aster, he asked whether the conversation was over and what had been said. Aster calmly replied that Zenith had offered to bring him into the main family, but that he had refused. The answer stunned Hyfried. His eyes widened, and he exclaimed in disbelief, clearly never expecting such a refusal. At the same time, another voice spoke from nearby and remarked that it was a waste, since joining the main family officially would have brought far greater profit. The speaker was the blue-haired man. Aster looked toward him carefully and recognized him as Count Maze. He then asked why Count Maze had made a proposal earlier that seemed to help him. Maze looked slightly puzzled, then casually answered that it was nothing so grand. He said he had merely felt a bit irritated by a brat who seemed too arrogant. Then Maze stepped closer and placed a friendly but confident hand on Aster's shoulder. He said that, regardless, from that day onward Aster had become, both in name and in fact, a son who possessed the 7 wings. With that, he gestured around the room and told Aster to look carefully. As Aster did, he noticed the expressions around him. Most said nothing, but their intentions were plainly visible. Some stared at him with fascination and greed. Others watched with calculation. Many of them were silently thinking that this was what the 7 wings truly meant. A few were openly tempted and inwardly desired that power for themselves. Others were more cautious and darkly concluded that it should be removed before it became a threat. To them, he was still only a child, and therefore still someone who could be used. The space around Aster quietly filled with hidden schemes, ambition, and desire. Noticing all of it, Count Maze spoke again in a calm voice. He reminded Aster that, as he himself had said, the 7 wings emblem alone carried immense value. From now on, the number of people trying to recruit him would only continue to grow. Aster looked directly at him and bluntly asked whether Count Maze was one of those people as well. For a moment Maze seemed slightly surprised, but he quickly regained his usual ease and replied that, whether it seemed that way or not, he was a member of the board of the Knights Academy. Aster silently observed him. Inwardly, he thought that Maze was a strange man, and that it was still too early to call him an ally. At that point Hyfried stepped closer and gently placed a hand on Aster's shoulder. Looking satisfied, he said that it was time for them to leave, and that Aster still needed to tell his sisters about the performance he had given that day. Aster nodded and answered that they should go. Then he added that once his mother saw those wounds, she would probably faint. The scene shifted again, this time to another noble residence where the atmosphere was calmer, though the conversation inside remained serious. A knight stood respectfully before his superior and reported that young Darius had died during the trial set by Zenith the other day. The man seated before him quietly replied that he saw. That man was Roderick. After a brief pause, Roderick added that he had also heard Hyfried's son had been summoned by the elders of the main family, then asked what had happened to him. The knight hesitated. Inwardly, he wondered whether Roderick truly felt nothing even over the death of his own son. Still, he kept his composure and answered respectfully that he had a report on that matter as well. Before the knight could continue, Roderick spoke again, as if he had already deduced the truth. He remarked that, just as he thought, that boy also possessed the 7 wings. The knight looked startled and asked whether he had known already. Roderick leaned back slightly and answered in a calm, thoughtful tone that, if this continued, the balance of power maintained within Elmheim for so long might collapse. The knight carefully asked whether they should take action. Roderick dismissed the concern with a small wave of his hand. He said they should leave it alone, adding that if Elmheim could be shaken by an obstacle of that level, then the clan would have gone extinct long ago. Then a faint smile appeared on his face as he added that, though he was in no rush, those wings would one day be his. His eyes darkened as he continued. Until then, he would allow the boy to enjoy himself freely. He said he wanted to see how long the infant who had escaped that day could endure, and that the whole matter would entertain him for a while. As he spoke of the child of the 7 wings, Aster, the anger and hostility on his face were unmistakable. The scene shifted once more. 4 years later, a loud voice echoed across a wide-open area crowded with people. Applicants for the Dorsal Knights Academy entrance exam were being directed to register and move quickly to the next checkpoint. Young candidates packed the area, all gathered to take the Academy's entrance examination. Among them, a muscular soldier noticed someone in the distance and nudged the man beside him, asking whether that could be the famous one. The other man quickly denied it, saying that it could not be, because he had heard the person in question was supposed to be much more corpulent. At the registration desk, An official pushed forward a document and firmly explained that neither the kingdom nor the knightly order would be responsible for injuries or accidents during the examination. He stated that, if the applicant agreed, he should sign and then present his wing emblem. As he reviewed the candidates, the official remarked that they could not overlook anyone lacking magical power. Then he began to read out the next applicant's identity, starting with the emblem of the wings belonging to Aster Elmheim. But before he could say the name properly, his tongue stumbled. He looked up at the person standing before him and froze in surprise. The young man tilted his head slightly and calmly asked whether presenting the emblem was mandatory. He explained that his was located in a somewhat troublesome place to show, then casually asked whether his face alone would be enough instead. The one standing there with that relaxed smile was Aster himself. The scene shifts to a vast hall where a crowd has gathered outside, and at the center of it all, Aster walks forward with calm, steady confidence. Someone calls out to him from behind again and again until a man in green steps forward, points at him mockingly, and says that Aster is the smug-looking man he has never seen before. He adds that he does not know which noble house or country Aster comes from, then introduces himself as Viggersmeets. With a sneer, he asks whether Aster came to the wrong place. Spreading his arms as though presenting the grounds, he says that this is the exam site for the glorious Kingdom Knight Cadets, a place meant only for the finest among knights. Aster remains completely unfazed and replies that, in that case, there is no issue. Vigor pauses in surprise, then raises his voice and says that everyone here has endured brutal hardship while chasing the glorious road of the elite, taking this exam again and again for that dream. His gaze drops to the weapon at Aster's side, and he mocks him for carrying what looks like a child-sized sword. He says everyone can see it and declares that this is no place for an inexperienced swordsman like him. He tells him that if he only came to look around, he should go home. His loud voice draws attention from the people nearby. Some whisper that he is doing it again and call him the new guy bully. Another sighs and says he never gets tired of this every year. But then the man looks more closely at Aster and asks whether he is the Olmheim from the rumors. A third person quietly says that he must be Aster of the Seven Wings. At that, Vigor stiffens in shock, the word Seven Wings echoing in his mind. Before he can react further, another man steps forward with an easy smile and a strangely familiar tone. He says that he had wondered who the newcomer was, only to find that it is cousin Aster. Aster's calm expression finally changes. He turns sharply toward the speaker and narrows his eyes in recognition. It is Gurion. Gurion smiles faintly and steps closer. In a casual voice carrying a hidden edge, he says it has been a long time. He adds that since nobody seems to know when or where Aster was born, he took the liberty of calling him cousin. Aster listens in silence, his face unreadable. Then he calmly says that it is a shame about Darius. For a brief moment, silence falls, but Gurion's smile does not disappear. Instead, it sharpens. He lightly says that there is no need to worry because a disgrace like Darius deserved to die. He adds that he actually feels relieved now that Darius is gone, since the man had always acted overbearing simply because he was a year older. Gurion says that Darius was a nuisance to him as well. Then his eyes narrow as he looks straight at Aster, and the warmth leaves his voice. He says he does not care whether Aster is called Seven Wings or anything else, but warns him not to underestimate the people of the main house. With that, Gurion turns away. As he leaves, he glances back over his shoulder and says that here, no one is left to protect Aster. The tension remains even after he is gone. One onlooker exhales and says that having two people from Elmheim among the examinees means this term's candidates have terrible luck. Another mutters that the main house and the branch house are still fighting each other. A third quickly says that he wants no part in it. Meanwhile, Vigor, who had been shouting so arrogantly only moments ago, is now completely shaken. As the truth sinks in, he stammers and asks whether Aster is truly that Olmheim. Aster only gives a small, relaxed smile and says that just Aster is fine, senior. The scene then shifts to the first exam site, where a large group of candidates stands assembled beneath a heavy atmosphere of tension. At the front, an examiner steps forward and loudly praises them for making it this far. He says he wishes first to commend their courage and patriotism. He then declares that Kingdom Knights are nothing like the provincial knights scattered through the countryside. With visible pride, he says that Kingdom Knights serve the king, protect the king, and stand as glorious swords willing to risk their lives for him. He says there is no need for dull or blunt blades, and orders them to treat today's test as a battlefield and prove their true worth. As the speech echoes across the venue, Aster listens in silence. Inwardly, he thinks the words are absurd, yet his eyes remain steady as quiet resolve rises inside him. He realizes that he has finally returned to this place, the road to becoming a Kingdom Knight, a right he had once been denied when he was wingless. For a moment, memories stir within him of the days when he could only stand outside this path and never step onto it. But now, everything is different. Beyond this test lies the world of the strong, a world he could never touch before. His eyes sharpen as one man comes to mind, the figure who still stands at the top of that world, Kingdom Knight General Commander Roderick A. Olmheim. Aster's determination hardens. He thinks that Roderick should wait for him, because he will catch up soon. Then he reminds himself that to do that, he must first pass the selection exam. At that moment, the examiner speaks again and announces that the first test will begin. Before he can fully explain it, a sharp whistle cuts through the air. In the next instant, an arrow pierces one of the candidates straight through the head, and the man collapses on the spot. For a heartbeat, silence falls. Then shock tears through the crowd. A cold voice rings out and declares that the first exam is the trial of the arrow tower. The speaker adds that the last one left standing will be the winner. The announcement sends a chill through everyone present, and panic erupts at once. Some candidates look around wildly, unable to understand what is happening. One shouts in fear, asking what they are supposed to do. Another yells that they need to run, or they will all be killed if they stay. Then someone else shouts for everyone to group up, watch each other's backs, and block the arrows. His words snap many of them out of their panic. Several candidates quickly move together, raise their weapons, and desperately try to shield one another from the deadly storm of arrows raining down from above. Chaos spreads across the field as the examinees scramble to survive, forming small groups and fighting to endure the merciless assault. High above the field, the examiner watches the chaos with cold composure. He says that, as expected, the veterans from previous exams know how to respond, but even then the survival rate is only around 30%. He adds that such shallow methods will soon reach their limit. Almost as if to confirm his words, another candidate is struck by an arrow and falls. Still, the examiner remains indifferent. Then his attention settles on a white-haired participant who moves through the storm with effortless precision, deflecting arrows so cleanly that they seem meaningless. Watching him, the examiner says that this is the overwhelming problem-solving ability only those with a wing emblem can display. In sharp contrast, Aster does not move at all. He simply stands in place as though the rain of arrows has nothing to do with him. One candidate stares at him in disbelief and says that the fool must have frozen from fear. Nearby, his cousin coldly thinks that Aster may as well die there and end up like a hedgehog. Then everything changes. Aster calmly draws the small sword everyone had mocked. The instant it leaves its sheath, a fierce power erupts from him. The arrows flying toward him never even reach their target. They are destroyed in mid-air, erased by the force surrounding him. The people around him are stunned. One of them says in disbelief that he deflected every arrow. Aster stands calmly with a faint smile and tells them to send everything at him. His body continues to release overwhelming power, and every projectile aimed his way is repelled before it can get close. Someone nearby exclaims that he is a monster because not even arrows can approach him. Even the examiner is shaken. He realizes that Aster is spinning the magic he released to create air currents, and he is forced to admit that the control is extraordinary. Amid it all, Aster quietly reflects that it feels as though he is wrapped inside a storm. The force pouring from him is so intense that those nearby struggle just to endure its presence. After a while, someone hesitantly asks whether it has ended. From above, the examiner surveys the aftermath and announces that more survived than expected, though that changes nothing. He congratulates the remaining participants and tells them to look around at the corpses scattered nearby. He declares that those still standing have passed the first test, then orders them to move immediately to the next one and follow him. As the survivors absorb the weight of what just happened, Vigor Smeets looks around with fear and awe and remarks that the instructor is terrifying for unleashing such a relentless storm of arrows on them. Aster casually asks whether he is already exhausted, calling him Major. Vigor turns to him in confusion and asks why Aster does not look tired at all. From above, the examiner continues observing Aster and is astonished that he released so much magic without showing the slightest fatigue. In his mind, he calls Aster Elmheim, bearer of the 7 wings, and thinks that he must prove his courage in the next trial. Elsewhere, Gurion is also watching Aster. As he stares at him, he recalls someone firmly telling him that he understands what must be done, and that he must stop Aster from ever becoming a knight of the realm for the future of Elmheim. Remembering those words, Gurion's expression darkens with anger. Soon after, the scene shifts outside as everyone gathers for the next stage. An inspector steps forward and announces that, to ensure fairness, everyone will use the same sword in the next test. Before it begins, all participants must hand over their own weapons. One participant grumbles that this is troublesome. Aster, who has been listening quietly, asks whether it was different before. Vigor explains that the swords used by middle-class knights are not all that different, but Aster's sword is another matter. Other nearby knights overhear the exchange. Aster glances down at his sword and says that he understands. At that moment, Gurion approaches with a smug expression and remarks that, as expected of his cousin, he has already tamed his servants. Aster does not even look at him. He ignores him completely. Vigor, irritated, fires back and demands to know who Gurion is calling a servant. Gurion looks at him with contempt and says that he is merely the heir to Baron Smeets' house, a low-ranking noble from some forgotten village. He warns that if he chooses the wrong person to wag his tail at, he may come to regret it. Despite his anger, Vigor immediately changes his tone and begins flattering Gurion, insisting that he has nothing to do with Aster. Aster watches the whole exchange in silence and says nothing. Gurion then turns and leaves with his group, and Vigor quickly follows after him. Not long after, the examiner raises his voice and explains the second trial. He says that it will be a mock battle of attack and defense. The participants will be divided into 3 teams and compete over bases inside the forest. A base will be captured when a team raises its own flag on that base's pole. He adds that the team to secure 2 or more bases before the sunset bell rings will win. He further explains that destroying, stealing, or disabling the flags is strictly forbidden, but beyond that there are no restrictions. Then, in a colder tone, he says that the swords they have been given may be treated as permission to kill if necessary. After outlining the rules, he begins assigning the teams. Gurion becomes the leader of the first group. The white-haired participant leads the second, and Aster leads the third. Each stands at the head of his team, ready for the coming battle. In his assigned area, Aster calmly studies the situation and says that the match will begin when the smoke signal rises. There are 3 flags, 1 for each faction, and victory requires capturing 2 or more bases, including one's own. Vigor, who ended up on Aster's team, speaks with a serious look and says that this means only 1 team out of the 3 will pass. Aster calmly replies that this is true, but asks whether that is really something to fear. Another participant nervously says that this means they may have to fight Elmheim. A third adds hesitantly that this is troubling. As Aster listens to their anxious voices, he quietly tries to understand their hesitation. Before he can respond, Vigor suddenly raises his voice and openly admits that they are afraid. He says they are terrified of going against Elmheim because their enemy is the young master of its main house. He explains that if they oppose him, they may never again be able to call themselves knights with pride, and in the worst case, their families and followers could be wiped out. That is why no one wants to make Elmheim an enemy. After hearing all this, Aster picks up the blue flag and directly asks whether they intend to abandon the test. Vigor answers without hesitation that there will always be another chance, and that it is better to retreat now than ruin their lives forever. He says that Aster cannot understand what it feels like to be among the weak. Those words sink deep into Aster as he suddenly breaks into a run. He thinks that he never expected to be isolated in a team battle, yet he understands them. He reminds himself that he had forgotten what Elmheim means to ordinary knights. It is a tyrannical family they can never resist, and Gurion stands as the symbol of that terror. Even as he moves deeper into the forest, his teammates' words keep echoing in his mind, telling him that he cannot understand the feelings of the weak. Thinking it over, Aster quietly realizes that, in another way, he is not so different from them. Still, something feels wrong. The forest is too quiet. He wonders whether no one has started fighting yet. Without slowing down, Aster races straight toward the red flag. As Aster races through the forest, he wonders whether the others are simply moving cautiously. Then a voice calls out from ahead in amused surprise, saying that he really came alone. Aster stops. Waiting for him is the white-haired participant who stood out in the first test. The man calmly says that everything has gone just as he expected. He holds his flag in hand, and Aster immediately realizes that this must be why he stayed near his own base. The white-haired man looks straight at him, says that he was starting to get bored, then suddenly tosses his yellow flag into the air and boldly tells Aster to fight him. Aster is caught off guard and wonders what this means. At the same time, the man tightens his grip on his sword and the air between them turns tense. Elsewhere, Gurion advances with his group and coldly vows that he will show his cousin how the Almheim family fights. The second trial of the Knight of the Realm selection exam is already underway. The 20 participants have been split into 3 teams, and the rule is simple. The team that controls 2 or more bases by the end of the test wins. In other words, passing requires planting one's own team flag on enemy bases. In the middle of the battle, Aster steps forward and directly asks why his opponent, who should belong to the yellow team, is raising a red flag instead. The white-haired man calmly replies that the reason is simple. He has formed an alliance with Almheim. As he says this, he begins releasing sword energy, and the atmosphere immediately sharpens. At that moment, an observer reveals his identity. He says that the man is Christopher Nolan, eldest son of the Nolan family, the house famed as the founders of court fencing. He bears the 5-wing emblem. Though he was overshadowed by the 7-wing participant in the first test, only 2 people passed the arrow tower without even changing their expressions, and those 2 were Aster and Nolan. The observer adds that both are exceptional talents from Caballero with tremendous potential, and remarks that it is unfortunate such promising figures have been forced to face one another here. After hearing about the alliance, Aster immediately asks whether this is a secret pact and whether Christopher truly understands that only one team can win in the end. Christopher calmly blocks Aster's attack and says that he knows that perfectly well. He explains that since Elmheim stands on his side, he has already decided that the main house will be the one to win. He adds that, by now, his teammates should already be moving with Elmheim to attack Aster's base. At once, danger flashes through Aster's mind. He realizes that this is bad, because Smeets and the others are in serious danger. He presses Christopher again and asks whether Gurion threatened him, asking what would happen if he dared oppose Elmheim. Christopher advances without hesitation and replies that no one willingly steps in front of a moving carriage once they know it will crush them. He says that chivalric nobility exists within a rigid hierarchy, and that such submission is simply part of the natural order. As he speaks, he unleashes a powerful strike and declares that this too is the proper conduct of nobles. Aster struggles to block the attack, but the pressure keeps rising. In the next instant, his sword suddenly shatters. Looking at the broken blade, Aster realizes at once that something is wrong. He thinks that the sword is definitely strange and begins to suspect that he was deliberately given defective weapon for this exam. Christopher does not let up. He presses forward and confidently says that there is no need to worry, because their match will remain nothing more than a gentleman's duel. He adds that he dislikes the people of Elmheim, especially those who try too hard to stand out, and contemptuously mocks Aster while continuing to attack. By now, Aster's sword has been completely broken, and Christopher keeps pressing him without giving him room to recover. Yet Aster quickly regains his composure. Grabbing the broken fragment, he pours energy into it and launches a sudden counterattack. The strike flies toward Christopher with enough force to catch him off guard. Christopher manages to block it, but only barely. In that brief opening, he notices something unexpected. Aster has already turned and started running. Christopher shouts after him and demands to know whether he is truly fleeing, telling him to wait. Aster does not stop. As he moves away, he says that they will settle their fight later, because right now there is someone else he must deal with first. His calm voice makes it clear that he is not retreating out of fear, but because he has chosen his real target, his cousin. Christopher smiles and mocks him, asking whether he got scared and saying that he does not even deserve to be called a gentleman. After that, Christopher picks up the broken sword left on the ground and examines it. He questions what kind of blade it is and notes that, even for a cheap sword, its quality is far too poor. As he studies it, he realizes that something is clearly abnormal. Then he runs a hand through his hair, understands the truth, and quietly says that he sees now that this is Elmheim's work. Slightly irritated, he remarks that it is a very unpleasant way to ruin the atmosphere. Meanwhile, Aster returns to his territory and immediately calls out, asking whether Smeets is alright. Before he receives an answer, a familiar voice reaches him, saying that he arrived sooner than expected. Standing there is Gurion. It becomes clear that he has been behind the entire arrangement from the beginning. He calmly remarks that Nolan failed to stop Aster after all. Around him, everyone is already prepared for battle, ready to strike at any moment. Gurion continues by mocking Christopher's earlier words that, alone, he would be enough to deal with Aster, and says that he had great expectations because of that. Then he casually asks how things are going. Aster lets out a sigh before noticing that the third base has already been secured. Looking around, he sees the red flag raised over the base, marking it as Gurion's territory. This fills Aster with anger. He lashes out at Gurion and demands to know what happened to his teammates. Gurion's expression darkens slightly as he begins to answer, but before he can finish, someone appears behind Aster and points a sword at him. It is Vigor Smeets. Nervously, Vigor tells Aster that he told Aster from the start that they cannot defy the Elmheims. His words reveal that betrayal has shaken even Aster's own team, making it clear that everyone had willingly cooperated in the scheme, even if the damage had already been done. Still, he seems conflicted, though his voice lacks conviction. Gurion steps in with cold confidence and says that the others never even tried to resist, despite being no more than field monkeys. He adds that at least they understood which side of Elmheim they were supposed to support. Aster, hearing this, asks directly whether Gurion really believes he can defeat him just by gathering numbers. Gurion smiles and says that Aster is mistaken because the battle is already over. He explains the true victory condition of the attack and defense match once more. The team holding 2 or more bases when the exam ends will win. He says that even if Aster falls into despair and starts capturing bases now, he still will not have enough people to defend them. As Aster looks around, he notices that the blue flag has already been destroyed, making the situation even worse. Gurion goes on to reveal his strategy. He says that all they had to do is wait for Aster to move to another base, then raise the red flag again afterward. As long as they continue controlling 2 or more bases, victory is guaranteed. His smile grows wider as he explains how simple and effective the plan is. But Aster does not retreat. He firmly says that if that is their strategy, then he will make sure they cannot carry it out at all. His resolve becomes unmistakable as he declares that he will keep going until every last one of them is torn apart. Those words make the people around him tremble, but Gurion only smiles and mocks him, saying that he is just bluffing. He points at Aster's sword and says that it is already useless. He adds that even with 7 wings, Aster is nothing without a moon sword. At the same time, Gurion keeps exposing how carefully he arranged everything and then asks whether Aster truly intends to fight everyone present. Aster calmly answers that the situation is troublesome and even admits that Gurion has impressed him more than expected. He draws his weapon, but the broken blade makes even the onlookers uneasy. Then Aster says that Gurion planned things more thoroughly than he anticipated. Suddenly, he lets the sword fall from his hand. Seeing that, Gurion immediately declares that they have already won. But the moment the broken sword hits the ground, Aster readies himself once more. The fire in his eyes makes it clear that he has not given up in the slightest. Standing alone and completely unarmed, Aster smiles with calm confidence and once again praises the trap for being well prepared. The enemy leader, unable to sense the danger closing in on him, only lets his malicious grin widen. As the last fragments of broken steel clatter against the floor, the real battle begins. At the final instant, Aster ducks beneath a soldier's lethal swing, barely letting the blade pass over him. Then he launches forward and drives a crushing kick into the attacker, sending him flying. The fallen soldier's sword spins into the air. Aster reaches out without slowing down and snatches the blade mid-spin. In the next breath, he cuts through the remaining guards with one clean strike, sending a crimson wave across the battlefield. Grian stares at his ruined squad, unable to understand what just happened. None of it makes sense to him. Aster lifts the stolen sword and says that Grian made a fatal mistake by stepping out from the shadows. Crimson power surges around Aster as he declares that Grian's arrogance has already cost him the battle. Terrified and furious, Grian curses him and screams that he is a monster. Aster answers by leaping forward, his body exploding with a vortex of red energy. Mana propels him upward like a missile, carrying him across the huge distance to the wall in an instant. Grian looks up in horror, completely unable to believe that anyone could fly such an impossible distance. Before he can defend himself, Aster smashes through his guard and sends him plummeting. As they fall, a memory rushes through Aster's mind. He remembers the first time he hovered as a wingless infant, and the overwhelming sensation of power that came from bending mana to his will. With Grian helpless in his grip, Aster mocks him in mid-air, calmly showing off the aerial dominance that terrifies him. Grian finally panics and begs him to stop as the reality of his defeat sinks in. Aster raises the stolen blade, his glowing eyes filled with frightening authority, and prepares to pass judgment. A slow smirk crosses his face as he finishes taunting his enemy. With every bit of force behind the strike, Aster brings Grian crashing down. The impact triggers a massive explosion that shakes the area and sends smoke rising from the wall. From a distance, Bigger stares with his mouth hanging open, stammering in disbelief and demanding to know how anyone could fight like that. He cannot process the monstrous power before him because none of it follows common sense. Aster emerges from the smoke, casually dragging the battered Grian by the collar. He stops in front of the remaining crowd, his golden eyes fixed on them. Then he lifts the unconscious man one last time before dropping him onto the dirt like dead weight. The onlookers freeze in terror. No one moves until a desperate voice screams at them to act. Barely conscious, Grian spits out an order for his subordinates to finish the job. He invokes Elmheim's name and uses the Duke's authority to force them into action. Reluctantly, Bigger rushes forward and grabs a discarded sword. Aster remains calm and asks if they are truly that afraid of Elmheim's retaliation. The desperate swordsman admits that his minor noble family would be crushed like insects if they dared to defy the higher nobles. He explains bitterly that weak people have no choice but to bow their heads and act obedient just to survive. Overcome with frustration, he shouts that someone as powerful as Aster could never understand their miserable situation. Aster says nothing at first. He simply takes in the harsh truth of their lives. Then, instead of getting angry, a faint amused smile forms on his lips. The swordsman, baffled by his reaction, demands to know what he finds so funny. A memory strikes Aster. His sister, Kudryavka, once threw the exact same words at him. Returning to the present, Aster admits that he has been blessed with incredible power. But he also says that overwhelming strength gives him a responsibility only he can carry. Right there, Aster decides that the arrogant Elmheim family is his true enemy. With unwavering confidence, he declares that he will tear down the corrupt system from the ground up. The crowd goes completely silent. No one expected such a treasonous declaration. The beaten swordsman cannot believe what he is hearing. Bigger stammers a warning, terrified of the consequences. Aster does not back down. He confirms that he is declaring war against the ruling powers. He warns the lackeys that blind loyalty to the current lords will only lead to betrayal and a miserable death. He says that if they do not want to be discarded like trash, they need to rise up and fight back. Then Aster brandishes the legendary 7 wings as proof of his right to rule, and forces the terrified men to choose who their true master will be. A heavy silence falls over the courtyard as his ultimatum settles over everyone. From the dirt, Grian screams desperately, threatening to hunt down anyone who switches sides. Bigger and the others freeze under the venom of his voice. Sweat rolls down Bigger's face as the weight of the decision crushes him. Unable to hold back any longer, Bigger lets out a furious scream. Cursing bitterly, he drops his weapon into the dirt. Then he charges forward and demands to know if Aster can truly pull this off. He lays everything on the line, warning that if Aster gives them false hope, he will resent him forever. Aster does not flinch. He meets Bigger's gaze with glowing eyes and seals the promise without hesitation. Bigger's comrade then shouts his family title for everyone to hear, making it clear who is taking the first step. Raising the blue flag high, Bigger officially declares his allegiance to his new master. The crowd is stunned. Grian's entire scheme collapses in front of them. Pinned to the ground with a sword at his throat, Grian's eyes flare a demonic red as he spits hatred at Aster. Bigger's allies immediately gesture to the confused crowd, urging them to wake up and seize this chance to oppose the arrogant elites. With Aster standing quietly behind him, Bigger loudly declares his loyalty to the 7 wings. Nervous murmurs ripple through the examinees as they realize how outrageous this rebellion has become. Aster watches the chaos unfold and quietly calculates his next move. Gaining 1 noble is not enough. If he truly wants to dismantle Elmheim's empire, he needs an entire army. Across the ruined arena, Grian remains in the dirt, humiliated and broken by defeat. A silver-haired teammate cautiously approaches and offers him a hand. Grian violently swats it away, spitting venom at the people who tried to help him. His bruised face twists with hatred. He is terrified of what the main family will do if he allows a branch family upstart to win. As anger consumes him, a gruesome memory flashes through his mind, showing a severed arm and glowing red eyes, a brutal reminder of his brother's failure. Clutching his hand, Grian vows to survive. He refuses to accept such a pathetic ending. Just then, heady footsteps approach him, followed by a mocking voice. Grian snaps his head up, furious at being spoken down to. Standing before him is Nolan, the calm swordsman whose presence immediately draws out Grian's rage. Grian points a trembling finger toward Aster in the distance, furiously gesturing at Nolan as if he were a weapon that failed to eliminate the target. A twisted smirk spreads across Grian's battered face as he clings to what he believes is his final trump card. Even the spectators cannot deny that Nolan's swordsmanship may be the deadliest force in the arena. Like a rabid dog, Grian orders Nolan to cut Aster into pieces, but before his command can settle, a red cloth smacks him violently in the face. Nolan stands unmoved, his arms still extended after casually throwing the flag back to its owner. With a cold glare, he says that these cowardly tactics violate his code of chivalry. Then he turns away from Grian and officially cuts ties with him. The surrounding students stare in disbelief as the strongest fighter on the field openly abandons the main family. Nolan draws his sword with a sharp metallic ring and turns his focus to Aster. He demands that they finally settle their battle properly. Aster does not flinch. Dark energy glows in his eyes as he steps forward to accept the challenge. Nolan grips his sword tightly and stakes his family's legendary reputation on this clash. It becomes a battle of ideals, the refined swordsmanship of the Nolan bloodline against the mythical power of the Seven Wings. Golden aura erupts around Nolan's blade, making the air tremble beneath the pressure of his mana. He lunges forward with explosive speed and releases a devastating wave of light, determined to prove his superiority. Aster flares his monstrous red aura in response. He calmly withstands the attack and raises one hand, signaling that their true duel should wait. Forced to defend himself, Aster lifts his blade and blocks, unleashing a burst of crimson energy that overwhelms Nolan's assault. Straining under the weight of the clash, Nolan realizes that Aster's strength is far beyond what it was before. Confused by Aster's sudden lack of killing intent, Nolan demands to know if he has forgotten the stakes of the trial. He steps back through the dust and reminds Aster that Academy rules only allow one squad to claim victory. With a fierce swing of his blade, Nolan insists that their clash of ideals must be settled right there. Aster does not even raise his weapon. He says that a fight to the death does not fit into his plans. Looking Nolan directly in the eye, Aster reveals that he wants him to pass the exam and become a knight. The absurd statement stops Nolan cold, leaving him visibly confused. Aster gestures toward the surrounding students and explains that forcing a fellow rebel to give up his dream over a technicality would be a waste of talent. A scheming smile spreads across his face as his eyes glow with dark amusement. He declares that he plans to rig the entire test so every student walks away as a winner. The claim shocks the gathered competitors. Grian and the others sweat nervously, unable to grasp how such an impossible thing could happen. Aster admits there are no guarantees, but he insists that if everyone cooperates, they can break the system together. To begin, he turns away from Nolan and walks toward his beaten cousin. Still kneeling in the dirt, Grian flinches, expecting another punishment. Instead, Aster offers him an open hand and a warm smile, inviting his former rival to let go of their conflict and join his revolution. A single flag rises, throwing the observers into confusion. A purple-haired examiner loses control and screams at the competitors for somehow failing the most basic task of the trial, but Aster is already 10 steps ahead. Calmly, he explains the exact wording of the victory conditions and reveals the loophole hidden inside them. He lays out his masterstroke, a three-way alliance that jointly occupies the camps and guarantees victory for everyone involved. The furious official storms up to him and demands to know if this entire stunt is a sick joke meant to mock the academy. Behind Aster, Grian and the other recruits start sweating, their fragile confidence cracking under the examiner's anger. The official leans in with pure intimidation and tries to trap Aster with a hypothetical question. He asks if a true soldier would simply shake hands with a target he had been ordered to destroy. Aster answers without hesitation, using cold and practical logic. He says that a smart commander knows when an enemy is worth more alive than dead. Even as the examiner glares at the defiant student, his rigid belief in perfectly obedient, faceless knights keeps him rooted in place. Refusing to bend, the purple-haired official snaps that a mere recruit has no right to make strategic decisions on that scale. Aster does not retreat even a step. Instead, he boldly dares the examiner to disqualify them, pointing out that punishing students who followed the written rules would be nothing more than an abuse of authority. The official flinches at that, caught completely off guard by Aster's flawless logic. Seeing his hesitation, Aster pushes harder, leaning in as if to deliver the final strike against the Academy's authority. He calmly reminds the examiners that the powerful noble families backing many of these recruits would not quietly accept a mass disqualification. Trapped between Academy rules, political pressure, and the threat of noble outrage, the official can only grit his teeth in defeat. An hour later, the chaos settles into suffocating silence. The recruits wait in a tense room, each of them stewing in uncertainty. The quiet feels unbearable, broken only by Bigger Smate's restless tapping as his anxiety finally catches up with him. While Bigger worries that they might all be disqualified after all, Aster simply shrugs, completely calm despite the looming threat. To him, the delay itself is already proof that his gamble worked. If the Academy could have rejected them outright, it would have done so immediately. Across the room, Grian sits with his arms crossed, clearly losing patience with the agonizing wait. Bigger leans closer to Aster and quietly wonders how he managed to drag such a stubborn noble into their scheme. A knowing smirk appears on Aster's face, hinting at a hidden manipulation he has no intention of explaining yet. Before he can say anything, the heavy double doors are thrown open, shattering the tense silence. Both boys turn at once, instantly alert as the moment of judgment arrives. Principal Mimir himself steps through the doorway, arriving personally to deliver the final verdict on their unprecedented rebellion. The examination hall goes still as an unseen proctor commands everyone's attention for the announcement. A stern examiner steps beside Principal Mimir and orders the candidates to remain silent. Bigger leans over his desk, squinting at the legendary figure before them. Aster quickly hushes him and warns him not to underestimate the old man just because he appears ordinary. Mimir locks eyes with Aster, the mastermind behind the entire incident, and acknowledges that he has caused the administration an enormous headache. As he paces the stage, the principal explains that allowing so many students to pass at once is almost unheard of. While he speaks, the influence of the Academy's powerful directors looms over the decision, revealing that they have chosen to support Aster's audacious proposal. Aster furrows his brow, trying to understand the meaning hidden behind the principal's careful bureaucratic wording. Then a faint, knowing smile pulls at the corner of Mimir's mouth. With unexpected warmth, the principal announces that every single candidate has passed. For a heartbeat, no one moves. Then the entire auditorium erupts. The recruits explode into cheers as the impossible truth sinks in. Their gamble worked. Bigger throws both arms into the air in pure triumph, while Aster allows himself a quiet, satisfied smirk. Clapping his hands together, Principal Mimir officially welcomes them as the newest class of the Drassel Kingdom Night Academy. Hours later, the crushing tension of the exam finally melts away beneath the night sky. A loud sigh of relief drifts through the Academy bathhouse as the new cadets soak in a massive, luxurious tub. Bigger practically glows with happiness, marveling at the unbelievable comfort of their new elite lifestyle. Splashing in the warm water, he enthusiastically says that all of this is thanks to Aster. Aster runs a hand through his wet hair and quietly enjoys the rare moment of peace. Around them, the other recruits erupt into cheers, loudly swearing lifelong loyalty to the leader who secured their futures. But not everyone is ready to worship him. From the edge of the bath, Nolan scoffs and calls them opportunists, refusing to offer gratitude. When the others call him out, he defensively insists that his clash with Aster was only a tactical draw. Aster leans back with a confident smirk and brushes off the banter. He reminds them that they have just defied the untouchable Elmheims and still became official candidates. Then his playful mood fades into seriousness. He explains that this is only the beginning. From now on, they will need victory after victory if they want to tear down the corrupt establishment. With a fierce glint in his eyes, Aster declares the start of their grand rebellion. To make that impossible plan a reality, he is relying on his greatest advantage. His older sister, Alphen, is already an Academy veteran, and her insider knowledge should become the perfect weapon to support his campaign. Stepping away from the others, Aster grounds himself and remembers that the real, brutal training begins at dawn. Leaving the water behind, he realizes he still needs to adjust to the absurd luxury of this elite environment. Then, a sudden rustle behind him breaks his thoughts. Aster turns around and freezes. The entire bathhouse of recruits is kneeling at his feet. Caught completely off guard, he throws his hands up in panic as the crowd presses closer. The excited students gesture wildly and explain that praying to a living legend is bound to bring them divine luck. From the side, Nolan rubs his temples, already dreading the endless headache of dealing with such a chaotic faction. Far away from the Academy celebration, night hangs heavily over the imposing Elmheim estate. Inside a dimly lit study, the atmosphere is suffocating. Helen Elmheim coldly looks down at her kneeling son, disgusted that he crawled back after failing to eliminate the new Seven Wings. Her eyes shine with terrifying pink malice as she brings up Aster's bold vow to crush their noble family. Her voice drips with venom as she demands to know how Grian could simply stand there and swallow such a blatant insult to their bloodline. Sweating uncontrollably, the disgraced noble begs his mother for one more chance, promising that he will erase the stain of his failure. Before he can finish, a brutal strike smashes into his jaw and sends blood spraying across the room. A purple-haired girl steps into the light, her fist still raised. She viciously declares that trash does not deserve second chances. The force of the blow sends Grian skidding across the polished floor like a discarded ragdoll. Looking down at him with absolute contempt, Lillian A. Elmheim says that her pathetic brother would be more useful as monster feed. She compares him to another disgraced failure, Darius, making the insult cut even deeper. Trembling on the floor, Grian weakly pleads with his sister to stop. Lillian answers with no mercy, driving a devastating kick into him and launching him backward again. As her heavy boot stomps against the floor, Grion's mind twists with venom. Even now, he refuses to blame himself for his weakness. Battered and bleeding before his own family, his resentment boils over, and all of his hatred gathers around the one person who ruined everything. Aster. The memory strikes Grian like another blow, dragging him back to the moment Aster offered him a sinister deal. Back then, Grian had been confused and defensive as Aster preyed on his deepest fear, the wrath of the main family's great lord. Aster's glowing yellow eyes seemed to pierce straight through him as he laid out the truth. Returning empty-handed would mean certain death. Then, a splatter of fresh blood pulled Grion's attention away. The severed head of his brother Darius was revealed before him, and the gruesome sight shattered the last of his resolve. Aster used that horror to break him completely. Leaning close, Aster placed a heavy hand on Grion's shoulder and spoke of Darius's horrific final moments. With chilling malice, he laid out the terms. Grion would turn a blind eye to the plot Aster was preparing, or he would become the next decapitated warning. Cornered and paralyzed by terror, Grion had no choice but to swallow his pride and accept the bargain. Back in the Elmheim estate, Lillian's assault is suddenly stopped by a commanding voice. Bruised and weeping pathetically on the floor, Grian looks up and recognizes his savior, his older brother, Julius A. Elmheim sits arrogantly on a lavish chair, casually speaking about the bonds of blood while resting one hand on a woman's head. On his lap is none other than Alphen, Aster's sister. A metal mask binds her face, forcing her into submission. Julius tightens his grip on her skull and mocks her. She remains completely silent, but her glowing blue eyes burn with suppressed rage. Across the grand room, Helen traces her fingers over the Elmheim family crest, reflecting on the absolute authority their bloodline has held over the knights for generations. Her gaze darkens with a sinister pink glow as she acknowledges that Aster's rise as the new Seven Wings is a threat that must be extinguished. Turning her back to her children, Helen issues a chilling command. With a sharp gesture, she says they must remind the Academy exactly who holds power. A sadistic grin spreads across Lillian's face as her eyes flare with toxic pink light, eager to prove that the Elmheims are not mere figureheads. Julius matches her bloodlust, his demonic red gaze burning as he vows to unleash a brutal display of pure violence. The next morning, in the Academy's outdoor courtyard, the new cadets are thrown straight into a grueling physical evaluation. Over the clash of steel, an unseen instructor barks that every recruit there was handpicked to join the glorious Royal Knights. An ideal image of a fully armored warrior flashes through their minds as the teacher explains the unmatched combat strategy required to wear that cape. But reaching such an elite level is no easy task. Bigger strains every muscle in his body, trying to channel his green aura into a proper strike. The moment his attack hits the Blackstone target, the impact sends brutal feedback through his arms and completely shatters his magic. Sweat pours down his face as he curses under his breath, forced to realize how enormous the skill gap truly is. The instructor breaks down the Academy's strict 6-tier ranking system, explaining that only the most capable students will earn the right to learn advanced techniques. He warns that relying only on physical swordplay makes a knight third-rate, while relying only on magic raises them no higher than second-rate. Then the true standard is revealed as Aster steps forward, his blade already wrapped in a dense, crackling red aura. The instructor passionately declares that continuous growth is the only path to freedom. Aster swings. A colossal wave of power tears forward, shocking everyone present. The force of the strike leaves both the class and the teacher staring in disbelief. Aster stands perfectly calm, his weapon resting easily at his side after effortlessly cutting the supposedly indestructible target in two. The stone's smooth, glowing purple cross-section proves just how flawless his technique is. An impressed shout rises from the staff. Thrilled by the display, the instructor cheerfully announces that Aster's impossible strike will now serve as the new baseline for everyone else. The recruits respond with collective groans of despair. Unbeknownst to Aster, two mysterious figures watch his every movement from an upper balcony. Looking down at the courtyard, the high-ranking observers quietly discuss the rumored prodigy known as Seven Wings. They can hardly believe what they are seeing. Cutting through a golem-grade magic iron pillar with such effortless precision proves that Aster is undeniably special. Even so, the dark-haired observer warns that if the boy becomes complacent with his current strength, he will be swallowed whole. As they continue watching from above, the chilling thought of the Academy's true apex predators rises between them. The ruthless dragons. Aster and Bigger walk through a sunlit corridor, quietly discussing the brutal reality of their new position at the Academy. Bigger stares down at his evaluation card with a grimace, grumbling that the Academy's merit system is even more ruthless than he expected. He points out the harsh truth that, out of their entire class, only Aster and Nolan managed to rise above the lowest tier. For Bigger, the gap between a humble rank 5 and the prestigious rank 5 feels painfully wide. Aster notices his frustration and offers him an encouraging smile, reminding him that if they want to become Royal Knights, both of them need to reach rank 2 eventually anyway. Bigger sighs in exasperation, but the fire in his eyes returns. Half-jokingly, he says that Aster really is a strict boss. The sudden title catches Aster completely off guard, leaving him blinking in honest confusion. Dropping the joke, Bigger leans closer and asks if Aster has seriously forgotten the huge promise he made. The memory rushes back to Aster. Back in the examination arena, standing victoriously with his glowing blade in hand, he had boldly declared that he would crush the corrupt Elmheim faction. His words had ignited hope among the defeated recruits, making them look to him as the person who might finally save them from the system. Bigger firmly grabs Aster's shoulder and makes it clear that he intends to support him. Then he throws his arm up excitedly and declares that they will dismantle Elmheim together. Aster can only sigh at the sudden weight placed on him, but he accepts it. If everyone is looking to him for protection, then he has no choice but to grow stronger. Gripping his rank card tightly, Aster makes a quiet vow to himself. To destroy the corrupt establishment, he needs power on an entirely different level. But before any grand rebellion can begin, Bigger's stomach growls loudly, reminding both of them that they still need food if they want to survive the afternoon training. When they reach the dining hall, they find the entrance blocked by a crowd of anxious cadets. The gathered students murmur nervously, wondering what is happening inside. As Aster and Bigger push through, panic spreads through the crowd. Several cadets immediately recognize Aster and warn him that Elmheim is rampaging inside. A blonde aristocrat casually chews on bread while looking down at them with a mocking smile. The moment he acknowledges Aster's arrival, the tension in the hallway spikes. The arrogant noble taunts Aster for arriving late and says that they already started the feast without him. Inside the hall, the sight is pure humiliation. Julius and Lillian Elmheim are sitting arrogantly while using unconscious cadets as human furniture. Bigger's face drains of color as he begins to understand what he is seeing. Aster grimly confirms the monsters before them. The man is Julius A. Elmheim, second in line to the main family, and the girl beside him is his sadistic younger sister Lillian. Even as the siblings lounge casually in the dining hall, Aster remembers their reputation. Julius and Lillian are known as two of Elmheim's most ruthless tyrants, feared for their cruelty and blood-soaked methods. Sweat rolls down Aster's face as he mentally curses himself for forgetting that these threats were also enrolled in the academy. Lillian rests her foot on the metal mask covering her defeated younger brother's head, cruelly mocking him while sizing up her new prey. A muffled groan escapes from inside the iron contraption as she presses down harder. Bigger stares in confusion, unable to understand what the strange device locked around the boy's head is. Aster knows exactly what it is. His voice drops as he identifies it as the infamous iron shackle. The sight drags Aster into a grim vision of his past life, where he once crawled beneath the weight of that same suffocating mask. Julius drives his boot into Grian's back, snapping Aster back to the present. He mocks Grian for being raised too softly and flashes his own crimson mark while sitting on the defeated boy like a throne. Then he ridicules Grian for disgracing the Elmheim bloodline with a pathetic rank VI score. To make the humiliation worse, Julius grabs Grian by the heavy metal mask and sneers that his little sob story is worthless. With a sadistic grin, he boasts that he gave his younger brother this deadly motivation as a gift. As Julius speaks, the horrifying truth becomes clear. Many other masked victims are hidden throughout the hall. He explains to the terrified cadets that the cages restrict food, water, and air, forcing the wearer to fight for survival. Panic erupts as the students realize the full scale of Elmheim's cruelty. Julius gestures toward the lifeless-looking figures standing in the shadows and introduces them as their upperclassmen. Then he turns away from the crowd and focuses on a lone figure with long red hair, coaxing them out of the darkness. Heavy footsteps echo through the tense hall as the mysterious senior slowly steps into the light. Aster freezes. He instantly recognizes his older sister Alphen, trapped behind one of the metal masks. Julius spreads his arms with a twisted grin, silently mocking how unrecognizable she has become. Alphen stands rigidly in her white dress, completely sealed inside the suffocating iron cage. The realization shatters Aster's composure. He screams her name for the entire hall to hear. But behind the cold metal, Alphen can only avert her eyes, humiliated that her brother has to see her like this. Shock vanishes from Aster's face and is replaced by dark, explosive fury. His teeth grind together. His gloved hand clamps down on his sword hilt so tightly that his knuckles turn white. Without hesitation, he lunges straight at Julius, demanding to know what they did to his sister. Before his blade can reach him, Julius casually tosses another heavy iron cage onto the stone floor, stopping Aster's charge. Unbothered by the drawn weapon, Julius toys with the metal mask and tells the furious brother to calm down. Beside him, Grian lies motionless, serving as a grim example of what happens to those who resist. Then dozens of metal shackles begin dropping around the hall as Julius boasts that he brought enough toys for the entire class. Planting his boot on his fallen victim, Julius officially begins his twisted welcome party. Chaos erupts instantly. The masked upperclassmen swarm the new cadets. From the sidelines, Julius watches with glowing eyes and sadistic delight as he offers his brainwashed hounds a twisted reward. He commands them to place a metal cage on every survivor and drag them to his feet. Sparks fly as Bigger struggles under the relentless assault. He quickly realizes that the attackers are empty behind the eyes, moving like dead puppets. Nearby, Nolan barely deflects a glowing blade and immediately calculates that these drones are all high-ranking elites. The reality hits Bigger hard. He knew they would eventually have to fight the Elmheim faction, but this ambush is far beyond anything he expected. Pushed to the brink, he screams for his boss before he ends up as another brainwashed puppet. Before the attackers can finish him, Aster steps into the fray. His massive blade radiates jagged crimson energy. In a single devastating flash, he cuts down the two elites attacking Bigger, leaving them groaning on the ground. His golden eyes lock onto Julius with cold, controlled fury. Bigger can only stare in awe at the terrifying pressure surrounding Aster's power. Aster cuts through the chaos by demanding to know what Julius is trying to accomplish. Julius remains unfazed. He waves off the hostility and claims that this brutal culling is nothing more than an act of selection. As he mocks the weakness of the cadets, the reality of his cruelty plays out all around them, with mindless enforcers brutalizing terrified students who only wanted to pass the exam. Leaning back arrogantly, Julius gestures to the fallen and makes it clear that only the elite deserve to survive. Dangling a twisted metal mask from his fingers, he reveals his intention to enslave the weaker students into absolute obedience. Aster has no interest in his twisted philosophy. He cuts him off and grips his sword hilt as jagged red energy erupts from the blade. He demands that Julius remove the device from Alphen's face immediately. Without waiting for an answer, Aster brings his massive glowing sword crashing down toward Julius's skull. The strike is suddenly intercepted. Aster freezes in horror when he realizes that his own brainwashed sister has stepped in to protect Julius. Alphen forces him back with a sweeping slash of golden energy. Julius cruelly mocks Aster and claims that she chose to stand by his side. Then he flashes a demonic grin and urges Aster to ask her himself, twisting the knife even deeper. Aster is forced into an impossible situation, standing before his sister's raised blade while the air fills with unspoken tragedy. From the sidelines, Lillian giggles at the cruel family drama, clearly enjoying his torment. The pieces finally connect in Aster's mind. Alphen's long silence, his mother's frantic worry, and every unanswered question all lead to this sickening truth. This is what happened to his sister. Refusing to accept it, Aster launches forward. His weapon burns with monstrous crimson aura as he strikes at his own flesh and blood. Their blades collide, sending a shockwave through the dining hall. Aster desperately promises that he will break her free from Julius's control here and now. But Alphen's counterswing catches him off guard. The force staggers him backward, and he realizes that the mask has unlocked a terrifying amount of power inside her. Out of nowhere, Nolan vaults past him, furious that Aster is hesitating in the middle of battle. Gripping his glowing weapon, Nolan steps forward with fierce determination and aims his blade directly at Julius. Disgusted by such cowardly tactics, Nolan glares at the tyrant with pure contempt. He demands that Julius get out of his chair and fight like a real warrior. With a fierce battle cry, Nolan launches himself through the air, vowing to carve his family's martial arts style into Julius's flesh. But the devastating thrust is caught barehanded. Julius casually ignites his palm and mocks Nolan's desperate effort. Then he rises from his seat, releasing a terrifying aura of pure fire. His eyes glow red as the overwhelming heat instantly shatters Nolan's confidence. The flames race up Nolan's blade and burn his arm before he can pull away. Bathed in his own hellish magic, Julius laughs maniacally and declares that absolute strength is the only law that matters. With a brutal flaming kick, he sends Nolan flying across the hall like a discarded toy. Bigger panics and rushes toward him, screaming his friend's name in terror. But the damage is already done. Nolan lies crumpled on the ground, his body smoking and completely incapacitated by the overwhelming attack. Bigger recoils at the sight of his burns. Lillian chimes in with amusement, entertained by the destruction of Nolan's pride. Looming over the defeated pair with an iron mask in hand, she announces that she plans to keep the Nolan boy as her personal pet. With a demonic smile, she coldly dismisses Bigger, making it clear that his life has no value to her. Julius supports his sister's cruelty with an arrogant smirk and preaches that the strong have the absolute right to trample the weak. Then his glowing red gaze shifts back to Aster, clearly threatened by the resistance forming around him. To display his control, Julius watches with sadistic satisfaction as another innocent cadet is violently forced into a mind-altering mask. Surrounded by a terrifying aura of pure fire, Julius challenges Aster directly, his body radiating lethal heat. Aster glares back, one golden eye shining fiercely as he refuses to back down from his sadistic relative's taunts. Without a second thought, Aster launches himself forward and brings his crimson blade down in a devastating overhead strike. The impact erupts into a massive burst of sparks, but Julius blocks the heavy blow with flames and a smug grin. Aster grits his teeth in frustration, straining against the impenetrable wall of fire. His raw power is not enough to break through. Before he can adjust his stance, Julius's burning hand shoots out and clamps around his throat. Flames instantly engulf Aster at point-blank range. He screams in agony as the fire swallows him. From the sidelines, Bigger screams Aster's name in horror, completely powerless to stop the brutal execution. Julius looks disappointed by the pathetic display. He mocks the legendary title of 7 Wings and dismisses Aster as utterly useless. Fully swallowed by the inferno, Aster's eyes slide shut as if he's been defeated by the overwhelming gap in magic. But deep inside the blaze, a crimson light pulses from his sword hilt. Aster tightens his grip on the weapon and refuses to go down. His golden eyes snap open through the searing heat. Coldly, he warns Julius not to celebrate just because he managed to block one attack. Then Aster channels the very fire meant to destroy him. A monstrous spinning vortex of crimson energy erupts around his blade and tears across the battlefield. Julius is caught completely off guard by the mechanics of the counterattack, and for the first time, genuine panic flickers across his face. As the crimson blade cuts through the inferno, Julius realizes in horror that his own magic is being turned against him. The combined force of flames and red energy slams directly into him, shattering his smug composure. With a deafening crash, the shockwave launches the blonde tyrant backward and buries him deep in the shattered masonry of the Academy Hall. Aster lands among drifting embers, coughing through the smoke. Then he casually says that he missed Julius's earlier speech. His sword still radiates terrifying power as he steps forward and dismisses every arrogant word his cousin had spoken. Standing over the broken battlefield, Aster coldly dares Julius to speak again. Shadows cover his face as he delivers one final merciless insult, declaring that garbage has no right to talk. Massaging the burn marks around his neck, Aster's eerie golden eyes pierce through the dust as he mockingly asks if the fight is already over.